Officer Dana Rourke snatched the federal flight pass from Claire Mercer's hand, held it up in the pale morning fog, and tore it clean in half across the hood of her cruiser. Then she dropped the pieces in a puddle and told the woman in navy scrubs to get off her runway or she'd be arrested. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at the two wet pieces of paper and then back at Rourke. And that was the exact moment the encrypted radio on Claire's belt crackled to life. Air Force Command to Raven, actual. Confirm your position and landing authority. 30 seconds later, every officer on that tarmac went completely still. If this story already has your attention, do me a favor before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button and follow along so you don't miss what happens next. Give it a like if you're already feeling something, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The fog came in overnight and hadn't lifted by 6:15 in the morning, which was already a problem. Ironwood Municipal Airport sat at the edge of a low valley in the kind of small city that people drove through without stopping. Kettle Falls, population 42,000. The sort of place where the airport had one commercial gate, one private hangar, and a regional air traffic control tower that stayed fully staffed only because of a federal military operations contract it had held for 11 years. Claire Mercer arrived at the main security checkpoint at 6:04. She was driving a four-door sedan that had seen better years, and she was wearing plain navy scrubs under a dark rain jacket with no insignia on it anywhere. She had a travel bag in the back seat, an encrypted communications device clipped to her belt under the jacket, and a laminated federal flight pass in a clear plastic sleeve that she handed to the checkpoint officer without being asked. The officer, young, mid-20s, clearly not yet senior enough to know what he was looking at, took the pass and turned it over. He scanned it. The scanner beeped green. He held it up toward the light anyway, squinting, like he expected to find something wrong if he looked hard enough. "What's the purpose of your visit this morning?" "Federal aeromedical inspection," Claire said. "Incoming Air Force transport, ETA 0740. I need access to the primary maintenance corridor in runway 3. The officer handed the pass back. "Someone from the airport authority needs to authorize runway access. I can't clear you through to the tarmac without that." "That's standard. Who's on duty this morning?" "Officer Rourke is handling tarmac security. I can radio her." "Please do." He radioed. Claire stood at the checkpoint booth in the fog and listened to the back and forth, watching a cargo vehicle cross the far end of the airfield in the gray light. The radio crackled and Officer Dana Rourke said she'd be there in 3 minutes. She arrived in 4, pulling up in a white cruiser with the Ironwood Municipal Security logo on the door. She was somewhere in her late 40s, built like someone who had spent decades in law enforcement or wanted people to think she had, and she climbed out of the vehicle with the particular energy of a person who had already decided the answer was no before the question had been finished. Rourke took the flight pass from the checkpoint officer, glanced at it, and handed it back to Claire. "Where are you actually from?" she said. "The pass lists my federal authorization and issuing authority," Claire said. "I can see that. I'm asking where you're actually from." Claire let a beat pass. "I'm a senior aeromedical evacuation specialist, currently assigned to an inspection detail for an incoming Air Force medical transport. My authorization was issued through Air Mobility Command. It's on the pass." Rourke looked at Claire's sedan in the checkpoint lot. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in the way she was standing, something that happened when people made decisions based on information that had nothing to do with the actual facts in front of them. "You drove that car?" Rourke said. "I did." "Federal aeromedical specialist." Rourke said it the way people repeat a phrase they find unlikely. "That's correct." "How long have you had that pass?" "Officer," Claire checked the badge. "Officer Rourke. The pass was issued through proper channels, scanned clean at your checkpoint, and my orders are time-sensitive. I need access to the primary maintenance corridor in runway 3 before 0700. Can you authorize that, or do I need to go to your airport director?" Rourke took the pass back out of Claire's hand. She hadn't been offered it. She just reached over and took it. "I'm going to verify this through our own system," Rourke said. "Your scanner already verified it." "Our scanner reads the chip. I'm going to verify the issuing authority. That process takes 20 minutes, and I have 40 minutes before the transport approaches. If you need to run verification, you can run it while I'm escorted to the maintenance corridor." Rourke looked at her for a long moment. You're going to stand right here while I make a call. She walked back to her cruiser and spent 12 minutes on her radio. Claire stood at the checkpoint booth, and the young officer wouldn't quite meet her eyes. She watched the fog thin slightly over the south end of the runway, then thicken again near the tree line. The temperature was 41 degrees. The concrete under her shoes had a thin film of moisture, and the condensation was coming off the runway lights in small, slow curls. When Rourke came back, her posture had changed. My system shows your authorization code is unverified. Your system is not cleared for the issuing database, Claire said. The code requires a DoD-level query. Right. Rourke held out the pass. Then, as Claire reached for it, Rourke walked to the hood of her cruiser and placed it flat on the metal. She pressed her palm down on it once, and then she tore it in half. The sound was small, just paper giving way. But the checkpoint officer flinched. Claire looked at the two pieces sitting on the cruiser hood. She didn't move toward them. She didn't raise her voice. She said very evenly, "That document is federal property. What you just did is a federal offense." "You can report it," Rourke said. "Now step back behind the checkpoint barrier or I'm detaining you." "Badge number," Claire said. "Badge number 614. Want to write that down?" "Oh, wait. Look like you're a little short on documentation right now." Claire stepped back behind the barrier. She reached under her jacket and unclipped the encrypted communications device from her belt. She pressed a single contact button and held it at her side, not raising it, not speaking into it. Rourke was already walking away. The device came alive in Claire's hand, and the voice that came through it was crisp and authoritative and carried the kind of background audio that only existed in operating communications rooms. Air Force Command to Raven. Actual. Confirm your position and landing authority at Ironwood Municipal. We are tracking an issue with your access clearance. Rourke stopped walking. The checkpoint officer went rigid. Claire brought the device up. Raven Actual to Air Force Command. I am currently at the main security checkpoint. Access denied by local tarmac security. Flight pass has been destroyed by Officer Rourke, badge 614. I need an authority verification issued directly to the airport control tower and a status update on the incoming transport. Copy Raven Actual. Verification going out now. What is your timeline for runway 3 inspection? My timeline is compromised. I'm standing at the perimeter. Understood. Stand by. Rourke had turned around slowly. She was staring at the communications device, the kind of encrypted hardware that was not issued to nurses, not available for purchase, not something a person in a 4-year-old sedan in plain scrubs was supposed to be holding. "What?" Rourke said. "Is that?" "It's my radio," Claire said. "Otem." The airport director arrived 9 minutes later. Malcolm Dyer was a trim man in his late 50s who moved like someone who had learned to look relaxed while managing things carefully. He wore a pressed shirt under a fleece vest with the airport logo on it, and he had the kind of face that defaulted to a professional smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd been running Ironwood Municipal for going on 14 years, and in a city this size, that was long enough to become something close to permanent. He came out through the staff entrance and crossed the checkpoint lot without hurrying, and Claire watched him take in the scene. Rourke standing near her cruiser, the two pieces of the flight pass still on the hood, Claire standing in the lot with a communications device in her hand. "I'm Malcolm Dyer," he said, offering his hand to Claire. "Airport director. Why don't we take this conversation somewhere more productive?" "I appreciate that," Claire said. "I need runway 3 access for a pre-landing inspection. My window is closing." "I understand there's been some confusion about your credentials." "There's no confusion," Claire said. "My credentials were verified by your checkpoint scanner. Officer Rourke destroyed the physical document." Dyer glanced at the pieces of paper on the cruiser hood. His expression didn't shift in any way that was readable. "Dana," he said without inflection. "The scanner reading was inconclusive," Rourke said. "I made a judgment call." "The scanner beeped green," the checkpoint officer said quietly. Rourke shot him a look that could have stripped paint off a wall. Dyer turned back to Claire with the practiced manner of someone who managed friction for a living. "Here's what I'd like to do. We'll bring you inside, get you a coffee, run our own internal verification process, and get this sorted out properly. The incoming flight isn't critical timeline." "It is critical timeline," Claire said. "The transport is carrying emergency medical equipment for a coastal disaster response zone and is already on approach, and runway 3 needs to be inspected before that aircraft can land." "Our runways are fully certified," Dyer said. I can show you the documentation personally. I'd like to see runway 3 directly. Something moved across Dyer's face, too quick to name, and then it was gone, and he was smiling again. Let me make a call and we'll get this squared away. He stepped away and made a call on his own phone. Claire watched him, and she noticed, not for the first time, that he kept his back to her while he spoke. She also noticed that he looked at the maintenance corridor entrance twice during the conversation. Not conspicuously, just twice. When he came back, his voice had shifted slightly. I've spoken to our operations team. Until your credentials can be fully verified through our protocols, I'm not authorized to grant you access to restricted areas. You have verification coming through your control tower right now from Air Force Command. We'll review that through the appropriate chain. The appropriate chain is the federal authority that issued the verification. How much of this are you willing to put in writing, Mr. Dyer? I'm sorry? Your refusal, the grounds for it, your name and title. I'd like to document this decision before the transport lands. Dyer studied her for a moment. You're welcome to document whatever you like. You're also welcome to wait in our public arrivals area while we sort this out. Claire looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she said, I'll wait outside. She didn't go to the arrivals area. She walked to the far edge of the checkpoint lot, turned so her back was to the fence, and looked at the runway. The emergency system triggered at 6:47. A piercing 3-burst alarm cut through the airport's internal speakers, and the maintenance crew working on the south end of the airfield began radioing the control tower in rapid succession. Claire heard fragments of it through the checkpoint officer's radio. Something about a cascade failure, about the primary runway lighting network, about boards going dark across 3 sectors simultaneously. She moved back toward the checkpoint. What runway? She said to the officer. He looked at her, then at Rourke, then back at his radio. Runway 3, he said quietly. The runway she had been trying to reach for the past 40 minutes. The incoming Air Force transport was carrying 3,800 pounds of emergency medical equipment, sterile surgical supplies, portable ventilators, blood products, and 2 specialized trauma response units, bound for the Harlan County Coastal Disaster Response Hub. The aircraft had departed its origin base at OH-400 and had limited fuel reserves, accounting for the planned direct approach. It could not loiter. It could not divert without an immediate alternate designation, and the next viable alternate field was 62 miles out. Claire already knew most of this because she had read the mission brief before she left. She had been sent to Ironwood because the inspection request for this transport's landing had been filed 3 weeks earlier, and the field certification had come back with anomalies in the runway lighting data that didn't match the maintenance logs. The discrepancy had been small enough to miss if you weren't looking for it specifically, and she had been looking for it specifically. The control tower was now in rapid communication with Air Force Command, and the radio traffic was getting urgent. She could hear pieces of it from where she was standing. The transport's pilot had been informed of the runway lighting failure and was requesting guidance. Rourke appeared at the checkpoint and looked at Claire with something sharp in her face. This is not your jurisdiction. Whatever you think you're doing, you need to leave this area. The transport cannot land on a runway with a failed lighting network in this visibility, Claire said. Someone needs to assess whether Runway 4's independent system is functional, right now. Our operations team is handling it. Has your operations team done a direct visual inspection of Runway 4's lighting panels this morning? Rourke didn't answer. Has anyone physically checked whether the backup power for Runway 4's guidance system was activated after the scheduled maintenance window last Tuesday? Rourke stared at her. How do you know about... Because it was in the anomaly report, Claire said, the one that flagged this inspection. The backup system was documented as restored. I need to know if that documentation is accurate. You don't need to know anything. You're standing outside a barrier. Claire's communications device came alive again. Raven Actual, this is Air Force Command. We have a critical situation developing. The transport is at 32 minutes to approach. Control tower at Ironwood is not responding to authority verification. We are attempting contact through alternate channels. Raven Actual, confirm your status. Raven Actual confirms I am outside the security perimeter, Claire said clearly, so Rourke could hear every word. Access has been denied by Tarmac Security and Airport Director. Authority verification has not been accepted. Transport is 32 minutes out with a failed primary runway lighting network and unconfirmed backup status on Runway 4. I am requesting federal authority override to get access to that runway right now. There was a brief silence on the line, then, Raven. Actual. Standby. Federal override request is being escalated. You have our authority to proceed under emergency protocols if you can get access. Copy. She looked at Rourke. You heard that. I heard someone on a radio, Rourke said. That doesn't mean... Two vehicles appeared from the main road, moving fast. They were dark SUVs with federal plates, no markings, and they came through the airport's main access road with the kind of pace that meant whoever was driving them wasn't going to slow down for a gate barrier. They stopped hard at the checkpoint, and the doors opened, and 4 people got out wearing jackets with 3 letters on the back that made Rourke take a step backward. The lead investigator was a woman named Hargrove. She was efficient in the way that people become efficient when they have spent a decade dealing with situations that got worse every time someone wasted 30 seconds. She flashed credentials at Rourke without slowing down and walked directly to Claire. Raven Actual? That's me. Status on the transport? 28 minutes. Primary runway 3 lighting network has failed. Runway 4. Backup system status is unconfirmed. I haven't been allowed access. The field certification for this landing had anomalies I flagged 3 weeks ago. Hargrove was already on her own radio. I need the control tower patched through to my team right now, and I need someone physically on runway 4 in the next 4 minutes. She looked at Rourke. You are Officer Rourke? I am. You destroyed a federal document? I made a determination that the document was... That's a yes, Hargrove said. Step back from the checkpoint. You're being relieved from tarmac authority effective right now. She turned to 2 of her team. Go with her. She doesn't make any calls, she doesn't touch any equipment, and she doesn't go near the security logs. Rourke's face went through several stages in rapid succession. I have 14 years with this airport. Step back, Hargrove said, and something in her voice made the argument die immediately. Dyer appeared from the staff entrance, moving quickly, and his expression had shed the professional calm he'd been wearing earlier. He looked like a man who had just heard the sound of something structural giving way. What is the meaning of this? This is my airport, and I have not authorized federal... Mr. Dyer, Hargrove said, you don't have to authorize anything. We're operating under emergency federal jurisdiction. Right now, I need your cooperation or I need you out of the way. And those are the only 2 options. On what grounds? On the grounds that there is a United States Air Force medical transport 27 minutes from landing on a runway, your airport certified as fully operational when the lighting network has been in cascade failure since at least 47 minutes ago. Hargrove paused. We can discuss the rest of the grounds after the aircraft is safely on the ground. Dyer went quiet. Claire was already moving toward the maintenance corridor with 2 of Hargrove's team flanking her. The fog was slightly thinner now, enough that she could see the full length of runway 4 when she got to the end of the corridor and pushed the maintenance gate open. What she saw stopped her for exactly 2 seconds. The runway 4 lighting panels, the ones documented as fully restored, were dark. Not partially dark. Completely dark. Every panel on the left guidance row was dead, and 3 of the right side panels were flickering with the irregular pulse of failing backup power. The independent lighting system that was supposed to activate automatically in low visibility conditions had failed silently, with no alert to the tower, no maintenance flag, and no indication in the certification documents that it had never actually been fixed. She had 44 boxes of emergency medical supplies, 3,800 pounds of equipment, and a flight crew depending on a runway that looked like a black strip disappearing into gray fog. She keyed her radio. Hargrove. Runway 4 lighting is completely non-functional. Both guidance rows are dark except for 3 panels with intermittent power. The independent backup never activated. I need a power engineering team at the maintenance junction at the north end of the runway right now, and I need to know whether the portable guidance array is in the equipment warehouse or if it's already deployed somewhere. Stand by. She was already walking the runway edge, her shoes on the wet grass margin, looking at each panel housing as she passed it. The ground was soft from overnight rain and the fog condensed on her jacket and her hair and the back of her hands. She wasn't thinking about Rourke. She wasn't thinking about Dyer. She was thinking about the power junction layout she had memorized from the field diagrams 2 nights ago in a hotel room 60 miles from here, and whether the portable guidance array, listed in the equipment inventory as Warehouse B, Section 4, had been properly maintained. One of Hargrove's team was running to keep pace with her. How do you know this layout? I read the diagrams, Claire said. When? Before I came. You memorized runway schematics before a certification inspection? That's what I do, she said. And then, at the north end panel housing, she found the maintenance access door, and she found it unlocked, which was the first genuinely good thing that had happened since 6:04 in the morning. She got the cover open and looked at the power junction board. 3 breakers had tripped and not been reset. The fourth was showing a ground fault indicator light that had been taped over with black electrical tape, a deliberate concealment, so that the indicator would not show on the automated system check. She stared at that piece of tape for a moment. Then she looked up at the fog sitting on runway 4 and thought about the transport pilot up there somewhere, probably getting new information right now, trying to work out what this airport was going to give him. She peeled the tape off. She photographed the breaker panel with the documentation camera on her belt. She documented the tape itself, bagged it, and handed it to the investigator behind her. Then she said, "Get me the portable guidance array and find out who last accessed this maintenance junction." The investigator was already on his radio. The answer came back in under 90 seconds. The last badge used to access the North End maintenance junction was Officer Dana Rourke's. The timestamp was 11:47 p.m., 3 nights ago. The same night the maintenance crew had been denied access to run their scheduled lighting check. What? Claire stood at the maintenance junction with that information and let it sit for exactly as long as it needed to before she moved on. The transport was 19 minutes out. That was the only clock that mattered right now. "Get me the warehouse keys," she said. "Warehouse B." They got them. She walked there fast, through the fog and across the wet tarmac with 2 investigators and one of the maintenance crew leads, a heavy-set man named Garrett, who had been at this airport for 9 years and who looked at her with the particular expression of a person who has been told something is fine repeatedly while knowing that something is wrong. "The portable array," she said to him. "Do you know its condition?" "I know it was inspected last month," he said. "I know because I asked to do the inspection and was told by Dyer's office that it had already been done by an outside contractor." "Was that normal?" "No," Garrett said. "We've always done our own equipment inspections." "Which contractor?" He gave her a company name. She logged it. Warehouse B was unlocked. They went in, and Garrett led her to Section 4, and the portable guidance array was there. 6 units in a row, yellow casings. The emergency lighting equipment designed for exactly this kind of situation. She checked the first unit, fully charged. She checked the second, fully charged. She popped the maintenance seal on the third. The battery cell had been accessed, and the internal test circuit had been manually disabled. It would read as functional on a visual check, but would fail to activate under power load. She checked the fourth. Same thing. "How many of these do we need to run a minimum guidance array for a C-17 approach?" she asked Garrett. 6 working units minimum. She had checked 4. 2 were properly functional. 2 had been deliberately disabled. She moved to 5 and 6 quickly. 5 was functional. 6. She got the seal open and looked at it. 6 was fine. 3 working units out of 6. "We need 6, she said. "We have 3. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's a secondary cache. It's in the Civil Aviation Equipment Bay, west side of the terminal. It's not military certified, but the units are compatible with the guidance spec." "How many?" "Should be 4, maybe 5. Take me there." They ran. The transport was 14 minutes out, and the fog over runway 4 showed no signs of clearing. And somewhere above the cloud layer, a flight crew was waiting to hear whether Ironwood Municipal Airport was going to be able to give them a runway they could land on safely. Claire Mercer ran across the wet tarmac, rain jacket flapping, scrubs soaked at the hems, and she thought about the 3,800 pounds of medical equipment in that aircraft's hold, the ventilators, the surgical supplies, the blood products with a cold chain window that had already been ticking since 0400. And she ran faster. The Civil Aviation Equipment Bay was locked with a standard key deadbolt. Garrett had the master key ring. His hands were shaking slightly when he worked through the keys, and she didn't say anything about it. The lock opened. They went in. 4 portable guidance units. Civil aviation specification, compatible housing, correct power interface for the runway 4 junction system. She checked all 4 in 90 seconds. Every single one was functional. 7 working units, 1 more than minimum. She exhaled once, short and controlled, and turned to Garrett. "Can your crew deploy these in 11 minutes? He looked at the units, then at her. "We'll have to." "Then let's go." He got on his radio to his ground crew, and Claire was already moving back toward the runway, and behind her in the maintenance corridor she could hear the sounds of the investigation expanding. More vehicles, more radio traffic, the controlled chaos of multiple things happening at once. And somewhere in that noise she caught a fragment of conversation from near the security office where Dyer was standing with two of Hargrove's investigators. And what she caught was Dyer's voice, no longer smooth, no longer managing anything. "I want legal counsel before I answer any more questions." She kept walking. The portable array units went out to runway 4 in 12 minutes and 20 seconds. Not 11. 12:20. Garrett's crew was good, but the wet ground and the fog and the weight of the equipment added time that couldn't be helped. And Claire was at the runway 4 threshold with Hargrove's communications officer when the transport checked in at 9 minutes out and asked for an updated field status. "Runway 4 guidance array is being deployed now," Hargrove's comms officer said. "We need 7 minutes." The transport pilot's voice came back. "We're tight on fuel for a hold. What's your confidence level?" Hargrove looked at Claire. Claire looked at Garrett, who was directing his crew at the far end of the runway in the fog. "Tell him 85% confident in 7 minutes," Claire said, "and tell him to request alternate fuel divert status as a parallel track just in case. We're not going to need it, but he should have it ready." Hargrove's comms officer relayed it. The next 6 minutes were the longest 6 minutes Claire had stood through in a long time. She watched Garrett's crew work in the gray light, running cables, slotting units into the runway margin brackets, running power test sequences. One unit failed its activation test and had to be bypassed and replaced with the spare. That cost them 90 seconds. At minute 6 and 40 seconds, Garrett's voice came over the radio. "Array is live, runway 4 guidance is active. All 7 units reading green." Claire pressed her comms device. "Air Force Command, Raven actual. Runway 4 guidance array is deployed and active. Field is ready for approach. Confirm with control tower for final clearance." "Copy Raven actual. Control tower confirms. Cleared to land runway 4. Good work." She lowered the device. The fog sat on the runway and the lights pushed through it in even rows, amber and white, spaced and steady. And somewhere above the cloud layer the transport was already turning onto approach, and the pilot could see what he needed to see. Garrett appeared at her shoulder, breathing hard. "Did it," he said. "Your crew did it," she said. He nodded, and then he looked at her sideways. "Who are you really?" She looked at the runway lights for a moment. "I'm the nurse they tried to throw out," she said. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, the aircraft broke through the low cloud ceiling on final approach, landing gear down, navigation lights steady in the gray morning, and it touched down on runway 4 with a sound like controlled thunder, the engines reversing hard, the transport slowing along the lit path that Garrett's crew had just finished laying out 9 minutes after it should have been impossible. The wheels rolled true. The aircraft decelerated cleanly. It turned off at the far taxiway and came to a stop in front of the cargo bay, where the ground crew was already waiting. Claire stood at the threshold and watched it. She was wet to the skin from the fog, and her shoes were soaked through and her hands were cold. She had a documentation camera on her belt and an encrypted radio and no federal flight pass because it was in 2 pieces in a puddle somewhere near the security checkpoint. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the investigation proceeding, the investigators pulling records, the maintenance crew being interviewed, the systematic unraveling of something that had been carefully hidden for a long time. And in that warehouse, 2 deliberately disabled guidance units sat in their yellow casings with their tampered battery cells, waiting to be cataloged as evidence. She turned away from the runway and walked back through the fog toward the checkpoint. Hargrove was there with 2 of her investigators and a laptop showing access records from the airport's badge system. She looked up when Claire approached. "Rourke's badge shows 17 accesses to that maintenance corridor in the past 4 months, Hargrove said. All of them on nights when maintenance crews were blocked from their scheduled checks. "And the guidance units in the warehouse," Claire said. "We're pulling chain of custody now. The contractor who supposedly inspected them. We're running them." Hargrove paused. "There's a connection we need to confirm, but the company is registered to a business address that's linked to a relative of Dyer's." Claire said nothing for a moment. The fog was starting to thin for real now, the pale morning light beginning to push through. The transport sat on the far tarmac with its cargo doors open and a ground crew working around it, and the medical equipment inside it would be loaded onto trucks within the hour and moving toward people who needed it badly. "The security logs," Claire said. from overnight, before I arrived. We're looking at them. Dyer knew I was coming. The inspection request was filed 3 weeks ago. Hargrove looked at her. You think he tried to cover it? I think the tape over that breaker indicator wasn't from 3 weeks ago, Claire said. The adhesive on it was recent, and I think the access logs from the hour before I arrived are going to show something. Hargrove turned to the investigator with the laptop. He started pulling timestamps. And then Officer Dana Rourke, who had been sitting in the back of a federal vehicle with 2 investigators for the past 40 minutes, suddenly said something through the open door that made everyone at the checkpoint go quiet. She said, I want to tell you what I know about the contractor. I want to tell you everything. Nobody moved for a full 3 seconds after Rourke said it. The investigator with the laptop stopped typing. Hargrove turned slowly from the access record she'd been scanning and looked at the open vehicle door where Rourke was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, and the fog sat on everything around them like a held breath. Say that again, Hargrove said. Rourke looked up. Her face had gone through something in the past 40 minutes. Some internal rearrangement that had moved her from defensive aggression to something flatter and harder to read. Not remorse exactly, more like the expression of someone who had done a long calculation and arrived at a conclusion they didn't like. I said I want to tell you about the contractor, Rourke repeated, but I want something in writing first. You don't get anything in writing before I know what you have, Hargrove said. Then we have nothing to talk about. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Claire. Claire had been standing 6 feet back, still wet from the fog, still holding her communications device. She didn't offer an opinion, and she didn't try to influence what Hargrove was going to do. That wasn't her call to make. What she did was step back another few feet, because she understood something that Hargrove probably also understood. Rourke was more likely to talk if the person she had publicly humiliated 90 minutes ago wasn't standing close enough to hear every word. Claire walked to the edge of the checkpoint lot and looked at the transport on the far tarmac. The cargo doors were wide open, and a line of ground crew personnel were moving equipment out in a practiced relay. Careful with it, efficient, the kind of people who understood that what was in those cases mattered to someone somewhere who was running out of time. She watched that for a while. Behind her, she could hear Hargrove and Rourke negotiating in low voices. She didn't listen. She thought instead about the maintenance junction panel, the 4 tripped breakers, the taped-over indicator light, the deliberate and specific effort required to disable something without leaving an obvious trace. That wasn't the work of someone panicking. That was the work of someone who had done it carefully, probably more than once, and who understood the system well enough to know exactly what would and wouldn't trigger an automated alert. Rourke had 17 logged accesses to that corridor in 4 months. 17. That was not a person who occasionally helped cover something up. That was a person who was central to how the cover-up functioned. The question that was beginning to take shape in Claire's mind was not about Rourke's role. It was about when this had started, and how much money was involved, and how many times a military transport or a commercial aircraft had landed on a runway that was certified as safe when the people running this airport knew it wasn't. The checkpoint officer, the young one who had scanned her pass at 6:04, appeared beside her. I just wanted to say, he started and then stopped. You don't have to, Claire said. The scanner read green, he said. I saw it. I want to make sure that's on record. It will be, she said. What's your name? Tillman. Marcus Tillman. Did anyone ask you to say the scanner reading was inconclusive? He hesitated. Not directly. But? After Rourke took the pass and went to her car, I got a radio message from the duty supervisor telling me to document the access attempt as a security hold, pending verification. I didn't write it up yet because I wasn't sure what I was supposed to put in it. Don't write anything in it now, Claire said. Tell Hargrove's team exactly what you just told me. Don't change the wording. Don't try to make it sound better or worse than it was. Okay, he said. Then, how'd you know something was wrong with the runway before the alarm went off? She looked at the lights on runway 4, still running their steady pattern in the thinning fog. Because I read everything I was given before I got here. And some of what I was given didn't match. Like what? Maintenance logs that showed work completed, but equipment inventories that showed the parts for that work were still in storage. You can't install something you still have on your shelf. Tillman was quiet for a moment. How long had that been going on? That's what the investigation is going to find out, she said. Go talk to Hargrove's team. He nodded and moved off toward the federal vehicles. Claire turned back toward the tarmac and thought about the inventory records. Parts on a shelf, work orders marked complete, payment processed. The money had been moving. And money that moved on paper while the parts stayed in a warehouse didn't go nowhere. It went somewhere specific, to someone specific, and it left a trace. It always left a trace. Hargrove gave Rourke 40 minutes, not because she wanted to, but because the negotiation required it. Rourke had clearly talked to someone before the federal vehicles arrived, or had been planning for this possibility long enough to know what she needed before she opened her mouth. What she got was a documented acknowledgement that her cooperation would be considered as a mitigating factor. What she did not get was immunity, a reduced charge, or anything that could be called a deal, because Hargrove wasn't in a position to offer those things, and Rourke's attorney, contacted by phone and on a speaker during the last 15 minutes, confirmed that Rourke understood the distinction. Then Rourke talked. Claire wasn't in the vehicle, but Hargrove briefed her afterward, standing at the edge of the tarmac with her arms folded against the morning chill, speaking in the clipped shorthand of someone who had a great deal to process and very little patience for unnecessary words. "The contractor is called Vantage Civil Systems," Hargrove said. "Rourke says they've had the maintenance and equipment inspection contract for this airport for 6 years. The principal officer of record is a man named Jeffrey Parr. He is Malcolm Dyer's brother-in-law." Claire said nothing. "Rourke says the arrangement started small, over-reported labor hours, materials marked as installed when they weren't. She says she got pulled in about 2 years ago when Dyer told her there had been a discrepancy in one of her own maintenance approvals from earlier that year. She'd signed off on a lighting check without running the full protocol. It was a paperwork shortcut she'd taken twice, apparently. And Dyer told her that if the federal oversight people ever looked at her approvals, she'd be the one who took the fall. So he had leverage, Claire said. And he used it, Hargrove said. She says the maintenance corridor access was her job. She would go in on nights when the crews were blocked, reset whatever needed to be reset, and make sure the fault indicators weren't visible on automated checks. She says she didn't know how deep the financial piece went. Whether that's true is a separate question. It might partially be true, Claire said. She may not have known the dollar amounts, but she knew the purpose. She knew the purpose, Hargrove confirmed. She also knew I was coming. That landed with weight. Dyer told her 3 days ago that there was going to be a federal inspection tied to this transport landing, Hargrove continued. He didn't tell her who specifically. He told her to make sure the maintenance corridor was locked down and that anyone who showed up with inspection credentials should be handled as a potential threat to airport security. Those were his words. Potential threat to airport security. Claire thought about the tape over the breaker indicator. 3 days ago. Placed carefully, specifically, to prevent the fault from showing on any check that might be run by someone who came with credentials and asked to look at the runway. He knew about me specifically, she said. The inspection request filed 3 weeks ago listed the lead inspector as an AMC-assigned aeromedical specialist with federal flight authorization. It didn't list your name, but your classification was in the filing. He knew what was coming and he had time to prepare. And he thought the maintenance corridor lockdown and Rourke blocking access would be enough. He thought if he could delay you long enough, the transport would land or divert, the inspection window would close, and there'd be nothing to show on the ground that day. He'd deal with the paperwork discrepancies later. He's been managing those for 6 years. Claire was quiet for a moment. Around them, the airport was in a state of controlled disruption. Federal investigators moving through the operations building, maintenance crew members being interviewed separately, the transport crew finishing their handoff of equipment to the ground convoy that would take it to the coast. Normal airport operations had been suspended, and the handful of commercial flights scheduled for the morning had been diverted. The security logs from overnight, Claire said. What did they show? Hargrove's expression shifted in a way that was hard to read at first, and then wasn't. They've been modified. When? Based on the metadata sometime between 0300 and 0430 this morning, before you arrived. Someone accessed the system and deleted a block of entries. We have the deletion record, but not what was deleted. Dyer. His credentials were used. Whether he was sitting at the keyboard himself is something we're going to establish. Claire looked toward the operations building, where she could see through the glass doors that 2 of Hargrove's investigators were with Dyer in what appeared to be the airport director's office. He was seated. They were standing. He had the posture of a man trying to maintain a position he had already lost. He made a mistake, Claire said. Several, Hargrove said. Specifically, if the logs had just been clean, with no record of the accesses Rourke made, you'd have to prove they happened through other means. But a deletion record is its own evidence. It proves someone knew what was in those logs and wanted it gone. That's obstruction on top of everything else. I know, Hargrove said. We know. She paused, then looked at Claire directly. Your anomaly report from 3 weeks ago, the discrepancy you flagged in the runway lighting data against the maintenance logs. That's what started this. Without that, this landing would have happened. The inspection window would have closed, and Vantage Civil Systems would have continued drawing federal contracts on falsified certifications. It might have happened anyway, Claire said. The runway 3 lighting system failed on its own this morning. Eventually something fails badly enough that it can't be hidden. Maybe, Hargrove said, or maybe it gets patched fast enough and blamed on weather. It's happened before at other facilities. She paused. How long have you been doing this? Aeromedical inspections? All of it, the work. Claire thought about it. 9 years, roughly. I spent the first 4 in active operational roles. Evacuation coordinator, flight medic certified, airfield certification training. The inspection work came later. And before the military? Community college nursing program, 2 years in a county hospital ER. Then I enlisted. Hargrove nodded slowly. Rourke told me she thought you were somebody's assistant when she first saw you at the checkpoint. Claire didn't say anything. I'm not making excuses for her, Hargrove said. I'm just telling you what she said. I know what she thought, Claire said. I knew it when she looked at my car. The operations building had a break room on the second floor with a window that looked out over the north side of the airfield. And at some point mid-morning, a member of Hargrove's support team brought Claire a cup of coffee and told her she didn't have to stand outside in the cold. She came in and sat in the break room and drank the coffee, which was stale and slightly bitter, and the best thing she'd had since the travel stop at 4 in the morning. She had her documentation notes open on the small tablet she carried in her travel bag, and she was going through the chronology. Not the one the investigators were building, but her own, the internal sequence of how she had read the anomaly flags, and worked out that something at Ironwood Municipal was being deliberately managed. The discrepancy had been small. A maintenance entry logged as complete for the runway 3 primary guidance junction, dated 8 weeks ago, showing 42 replacement components installed. The equipment inventory pulled from a separate database showed 42 units of the same component still listed as in stock in Warehouse B at the time of the log entry. Either the inventory hadn't been updated, which happened, or the work hadn't been done, which was a different problem entirely. She had flagged it and requested a clarification from the airport's maintenance coordinator. The response came back 4 days later, citing a database sync error and confirming the work had been completed. She had read that response 3 times and then submitted the inspection request anyway, because the explanation was technically plausible, but it was also exactly what someone would say if they needed to cover a discrepancy quickly. Her supervisor at this time had reviewed the flag and told her she might be overreading it. She had submitted the inspection request anyway. Garrett appeared at the break room door, still in his work jacket, his radio clipped to his shoulder. He looked like a man who had been awake for too long and was starting to feel the weight of it. They want me in the main interview room, he said. Second time this morning. Go, Claire said. Tell them everything you know. I don't know that much, he said. I know what I saw and what I wasn't allowed to do. That's everything, she said. That's exactly what they need. He stood there a moment longer. I put in 3 maintenance requests in the past 6 months that were denied without explanation. Once for the runway 3 junction. That was the one that failed this morning. Once for the Warehouse B unit checks. And once for a comprehensive review of the backup power systems. All denied by Dyer's office? Either Dyer's office or Rourke directly, depending on the request type. He looked out the window at the airfield. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know who to tell who would actually do anything about it. You could have contacted the Federal Oversight Office directly, Claire said, not as a criticism, just as a statement. I know, he said. I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation I was missing. He paused. And I was scared, honestly. Dyer runs this place like he's been here a long time. Everyone knows everyone. I've got a family. Claire held the coffee cup in both hands and looked at him. Tell the investigators about the denied requests, specifically dates, request numbers, who denied them, what reason, if any, was given. That documentation trail matters. He nodded and left. She sat with the cold quiet of the break room for a minute. The window showed the North Airfield, the transport on the far tarmac, a truck slowly pulling away toward the access road with the first load of medical equipment. 45 minutes from now, some of that equipment would be at a staging facility on the coast. Within the hour after that, it would start reaching people who needed it. The mission was done. That part was finished. What wasn't finished was the accounting, the long, slow, procedurally correct process of establishing exactly what had happened, when, how much money had moved, and who had made which decisions. That process was not going to be fast, and it was not going to be clean, and there were going to be points in it where lawyers intervened and paperwork stalled, and people who had done clear and specific things managed to make those things look complicated. That was how it always worked. She had been through enough investigations from the outside to know that the clarity of the moment, the taped indicator, the deleted logs, Rourke sitting in the back of that vehicle deciding to talk, that clarity didn't necessarily survive contact with the machinery that processed it. But the evidence was good. The evidence was very good. And something else was coming that she hadn't mentioned to Hargrove yet, because she was still working through whether her reading of it was correct. She went back down to the operations floor at 9:40 and found Hargrove in the corridor outside the director's office with two of her investigators, all of them looking at the same document on a shared tablet. "What's that?" Claire said. Hargrove handed her the tablet. It was a contract, a federal maintenance services contract, 5 years in duration, with Vantage Civil Systems as the service provider. The total value was listed as $4.3 million. It covered runway maintenance, lighting system inspection, equipment certification, and emergency systems testing across the full operational footprint of Ironwood Municipal Airport. The contract had been awarded 6 years ago. It had been renewed twice, both times without competitive bidding, both times citing a continuity of service provision that, technically, required documentation of exceptional performance during the prior contract period. Claire scrolled to the performance documentation section. The performance reviews were signed by the airport director, Malcolm Dyer, certifying that Vantage Civil Systems had met or exceeded all contractual requirements in each review period. He was certifying the performance of a company run by his own brother-in-law, she said, and using those certifications to justify the no-bid renewals, Hargrove said. The conflict of interest disclosure requirements for federal contracts require the certifying official to disclose any financial relationship with the contractor. There's no disclosure in any of these renewal files. 6 years and $4.3 million, Claire said. That's the listed contract value. Based on the payment records we're pulling, actual disbursements may be significantly higher. There were supplemental work orders issued outside the base contract. We're still pulling those totals. Claire handed the tablet back. She was thinking about something that had been sitting at the edge of her attention since she'd first spoken with Garrett, the way he had described the denied maintenance requests, the pattern of them, and the specific timing of the Warehouse B inspection that had been handed to Vantage Civil Systems instead of the in-house crew. The portable guidance units in the warehouse, she said, the two that were disabled, if they had been needed in an actual emergency, a real runway failure, not a managed one, and they'd failed to activate, we'd be looking at an accident investigation, Hargrove said quietly, and the certification documents for those units, the ones the outside contractor produced, they'd show as verified operational. So any failure investigation would have to explain why verified operational equipment didn't work. And it would take time to get to the tampering, and in the meantime, the airport's certification records would show everything was compliant. Hargrove was looking at her steadily. You're saying it was designed to be survivable as a cover story even in the event of an incident. I'm saying someone thought about what happened if something went wrong and built in a layer of deniability. That's not a person who grabbed some money and hoped for the best. That's deliberate design. You think Dyer architected this from the beginning? I think someone did, Claire said. Whether it was Dyer or Parr or both of them together, someone sat down and worked out how to structure this so that if a runway incident happened and investigators came, the paperwork trail would point to compliance failures, not fraud. Hargrove turned that over. We need Parr, she said. Where is he? Not at this airport. We're working on locating him now. One of the investigators at the end of the corridor said something in a low voice, and Hargrove moved toward him quickly. Claire followed. The investigator had a printed record in his hand, physical paper, which meant he'd run it from the operations center printer, rather than waited for a digital transfer, which meant it was something he'd wanted to have immediately. Security camera footage from the operations center, he said. Internal system, separate from the access logs that were modified. This one runs on an independent server in the tech room. Dyer's team didn't know about it, or didn't think to check it. He handed the paper to Hargrove, who read it, and then handed it to Claire without comment. It was a time-stamped log of footage captures. The camera covered the main operations terminal desk. The timestamps showed two people at the terminal between 0314 and 0402 in the morning, during the window when the security logs had been modified. One of them was Malcolm Dyer. The other was a woman Claire didn't recognize from the badge photo attached to the record. The name printed under the photo was Sonia Parr. That's the contractor's wife, Hargrove said. Or his sister, the investigator said. We haven't confirmed the relationship yet. But the last name, it's Dyer's sister, Claire said. Both of them looked at her. Jeffrey Parr's wife. And if she's Dyer's sister, then Parr is Dyer's brother-in-law from the sister's side, not the wife's side, which means the family connection runs through Dyer's own sibling. That's a closer relationship than what was in the initial briefing. How do you know that? Hargrove said. I don't know it, Claire said. I'm reading the badge photo. The facial structure is consistent. It might be wrong. Hargrove looked at the photo again. Then she got on her radio and started asking questions. It took 11 minutes to confirm. Sonia Parr, née Dyer. Malcolm Dyer's younger sister, wife of Jeffrey Parr, principal officer of Vantage Civil Systems. Present at the operations terminal at 3 in the morning, helping her brother delete the evidence of what they had spent 6 years building together. The next hour moved in the way that investigative work always moved, in bursts and pauses, information arriving fast and then stopping while something was confirmed, documents pulled, people separated and interviewed, the picture filling in, piece by piece, not in a straight line, but in the jagged way that truth actually assembled itself when it had been deliberately buried. Dyer stopped talking at 10:20 and formally requested counsel. His attorney arrived by phone first and in person by 11:15, and after that the director's office was closed to investigators while the attorney established parameters. That was his right, and the investigators moved around it with the patience of people who understood that the document trail was going to outlast whatever Dyer's attorney could protect. Rourke, for her part, kept talking, not freely, not comfortably, but consistently, feeding information in exchange for the documented acknowledgement of her cooperation, piece by piece, in the way that someone gave up something they'd been holding tightly for a long time. She confirmed the warehouse unit tampering. She confirmed that she had been the one to access the North End junction panel on the night 3 days ago and disable the backup indicator. She confirmed that Dyer had specifically told her the incoming inspection needed to be stopped at the perimeter, that the inspector needed to be treated as a security problem, and that the phrase he had used, the one that had apparently stayed with her, was, "Don't let her get anywhere near that runway." Her. He'd known the inspector was a woman. He'd known more than the filing had shown. When Hargrove reported that detail to Claire, they were standing outside in the airfield again, the fog finally gone. The morning fully arrived, pale and cold and clear. He had more information than what was in the official filing, Claire said. The inspection request goes through a routing process, Hargrove said. There are multiple points where someone with the right access could have pulled additional information about the assigned inspector, which means someone in the routing chain either gave him information or he accessed it himself through channels he shouldn't have had. We're running it. Claire stood in the cold, clear air and thought about that, about a man at an operations terminal at 3 in the morning, erasing logs with his sister beside him, and also somehow knowing before she arrived that the woman coming to inspect his runway was someone he needed to stop before she set foot on the tarmac. He had had time and information and a prepared strategy. He had Rourke at the checkpoint and a cover story ready and access logs modified and guidance units tampered with in a warehouse. And it still hadn't been enough. There's something else, Hargrove said. Claire looked at her. Vantage Civil Systems holds contracts at 2 other facilities, not military transport hubs, but regional airports with federal maintenance agreements. We flagged both for immediate review. The same structure? Claire said. Too early to say. But the contract terms are similar, and one of the facilities had a runway lighting discrepancy flagged 18 months ago that was resolved through a Vantage Civil Systems supplemental work order. Was the discrepancy independently verified after the work order? No record of an independent verification. Claire absorbed that. How many aircraft have landed on runways that Vantage Civil certified in the past 6 years? She said. Hargrove didn't answer immediately. That was its own kind of answer. That's what we're going to have to establish, she said finally. This goes further than this airport. The morning light fell across the empty runway 4, the portable guidance array still in place along its edges, the yellow casings catching the sun. Garrett's crew would break it down later, once the investigation team cleared the runway for routine access again. It had done its job. It had gotten the aircraft down. In the operations building behind them, investigators were building a case that was going to take months to fully prosecute and years to fully resolve. Lawyers were going to complicate it. Documents were going to require expert analysis. The financial forensics were going to be extensive. But the tape over the breaker indicator was already in an evidence bag. The deleted logs had a deletion record. The security footage showed 2 people at the operations terminal in the dark hours of the morning trying to make something disappear. And Sonia Parr, who had helped her brother do it, had not yet been located. Claire's radio came alive. It was Air Force Command updating her on the transport status. The convoy was 40 minutes from the coast. The cold chain on the blood products was holding. The mission was intact. She acknowledged it and lowered the radio. And then her phone rang. Not the encrypted device, but her personal phone, the number she gave to people she trusted. And the name on the screen made her go very still. It was a contact she had listed only as VP. She had not spoken to this person in 2 years. She had not expected to hear from them today. She stepped away from Hargrove and answered. "I heard you had some trouble getting onto the tarmac this morning," the voice said. "I managed," Claire said. "I know you managed. I'm calling because we've been watching Ironwood for longer than 3 weeks, Claire. And there's something you don't know yet about why this airport specifically was chosen for this transport routing." She looked at the empty runway, at the guidance lights running their steady pattern in the morning sun. "Tell me," she said. "Not on this line," the voice said, "and not here. There's a name in the Vantage Civil Systems registration documents that isn't Jeffrey Parr and isn't Dyer. It's a third party, a silent interest holder, and when you find out who it is..." A pause. "Claire, this goes further than you think it does." The call ended. She stood with the phone at her side and the cold morning air around her and looked at the airfield and thought about a maintenance contract worth $4.3 million that had run for 6 years at one airport and 2 other airports where similar contracts existed, and a third name somewhere in a registration document that no one had found yet. And she thought about the fact that the transport had been routed through Ironwood Municipal specifically, not through any of the 3 larger regional airports within 60 miles, and that the routing decision had been made at a level above the one she had been briefed on. Someone had wanted this aircraft at this airport. The question was whether they had wanted it here because it was convenient, or because it was a test of something, a test of whether what was buried here would stay buried when pressure was applied. She put her phone in her jacket pocket and turned back toward the operations building. She needed to find Hargrove, and she needed to ask about the routing decision, who had made it, when, and whether anyone had pushed back. Because if a third party had a silent interest in Vantage Civil Systems, and that third party also had a connection to transport routing decisions, then what had happened this morning at Ironwood Municipal Airport was not the core of the problem. It was the surface of it. She found Hargrove in the operations center, standing over a table covered in printed contract documents, and she didn't waste time on preamble. "The transport routing," Claire said. "Who made the decision to send it through Ironwood?" Hargrove looked up. "Air Mobility Command Operations Desk. Standard routing decision." "Was there pushback from anyone on the routing?" "Not that I'm aware of. Why?" "I just got a call from a source I trust. They're telling me there's a third name in the Vantage Civil Systems registration, a silent interest holder, and they're suggesting the transport was routed here specifically." Claire paused. "I need to know if the routing decision went through any channel that touches airport management, or any channel that could have been accessed by someone with a stake in what happens at this facility." Hargrove put down the document she was holding. "That's a serious implication." "I know what it is. I'm telling you because you need to run it, not because I have proof." Hargrove looked at her for a long moment, and Claire could see her working through it. The additional complexity, the new direction, the way it changed the shape of what they were already building. Investigations had weight. Adding a new load-bearing element to one that was already in progress was not a simple thing, and Hargrove had the expression of someone who was doing structural math in real time. "Who's the source?" Hargrove said. "Someone from my prior operational assignment. I can't give you the name without their clearance, but I can tell you the reliability is high. They didn't reach out to speculate. They reached out because they have something specific. Can you get them to come in?" "I can try, but the call ended before I could establish a meeting point, and the contact is cautious about secure communication protocols." Claire looked at the contract documents spread across the table. "In the meantime, the Vantage Civil registration. Do you have it?" Hargrove nodded at the investigator who had pulled the footage record earlier. He went to a separate file stack and came back with a corporate registration document, 6 pages, state-filed, covering the formation of Vantage Civil Systems and its officer structure. Claire read it standing up. Jeffrey Parr, Principal Officer. A second name listed as co-director, a woman named Renata Voss, who showed no family connection to Dyer in any record visible here. And then, in the interest holder section near the back, a limited liability entity registered in a different state, listed as holding a 22% equity interest in Vantage Civil Systems. The entity was called Millward Logistics Group. Claire read the name twice and handed the document back. "Millward Logistics Group," she said. "That name mean anything to your team?" Hargrove took the document and read the section herself. "Not immediately." She handed it to the investigator. "Run it. Full registration history, officer list, any federal contract relationships." He moved off with it. Claire stood in the operations center and thought about her source's voice on the phone, the specific weight on the words when you find out who it is. Not what it is. Who. Which meant the entity name itself wasn't the end of the trail. It was the cover over something with a face. The Millward Logistics Group result came back in 23 minutes, and what it showed stopped 3 investigators simultaneously. Millward Logistics Group was registered in Delaware, standard for holding entities, with a formation date of 14 months before Vantage Civil Systems received its first contract at Ironwood Municipal. Its listed officers were administering they didn't have at hand, but the federal contract database search, run in parallel, pulled something faster. Millward Logistics Group appeared in 2 prior federal procurement investigations as an associated entity. Both investigations had been closed without charges. The lead investigator on both of those prior cases was listed in the federal system as having retired 18 months ago. His name was Conrad Bellamy, former regional director, Federal Aviation Contracting Oversight. Retired. Now, according to a business registry search run in the same query, listed as a private consultant. Hargrove read the result. Her jaw tightened in a way that was barely visible. "Bellamy was the oversight director," she said. "He was the person responsible for reviewing contract renewals for airports in this region." "Including Ironwood," Claire said. "Including Ironwood. He retired 18 months ago. After the second investigation into Millward was closed. And he's now a consultant," Claire said. "Do we know for whom?" The investigator was already pulling it. The consulting registry showed Conrad Bellamy associated with 3 client engagements since his retirement. 2 were listed by industry category only. The third showed a client name, Parr Infrastructure Advisory, Jeffrey Parr's consulting practice, the man who ran Vantage Civil Systems. The room had gone quiet in the particular way that happened when multiple people reached the same conclusion at the same moment, and nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Hargrove said it first. He ran the oversight process that approved the contract renewals. Then he retired and went to work for the contractor whose renewals he'd approved. Through an intermediate entity so it wouldn't look direct, Claire said. Millward Logistics holds equity in Vantage Civil. Bellamy consults for Parr's advisory practice. On paper, Bellamy doesn't work for Vantage Civil. He works for a separate consultancy that happens to be run by the same man. And the 2 prior investigations into Millward, Hargrove said, were closed by the office he ran. Claire heard the weight of that settle. 6 years of payments. 2 airports beyond Ironwood flagged for review. A 22% equity stake held through a Delaware LLC. A retired federal official sitting inside the same network, clean on paper, useful in ways that didn't require his name to appear anywhere critical. He knew I was coming, Claire said, and it wasn't a question now, it was a rearrangement. Dyer knew more than the official filing showed. If Bellamy still has contacts in the procurement routing system, or if Parr does through the advisory business, they could have accessed inspector assignment information before the filing was public. We need Bellamy, Hargrove said. Does he have federal charges pending from the prior investigations? Investigations closed without charges. He's clean on paper. Then he's going to be difficult to compel. He doesn't need to be compelled, Hargrove said. He needs to not know what we have before we talk to him. She turned to the senior investigator on her team, a lean, quiet man named Adler, who had spent the morning pulling documents without speaking more than 20 words. Adler, Bellamy's location. I want it without any contact that might tip him. Adler nodded and moved. Claire looked out through the operations center windows at the airfield. The portable guidance array was still on runway 4, yellow casings in the morning light. The transport convoy was long gone, somewhere on the coast highway. The airport itself felt strange now, frozen in its normal functions, operating under federal control, the usual hum of a working regional facility replaced by the controlled stillness of a facility under investigation. She thought about the routing decision again. An Air Mobility Command Operations Desk, standard procedure, transport assigned to Ironwood Municipal instead of a larger hub. If Bellamy or someone connected to this network had any residual access to transport routing information, any contacts still working in the system who could be asked to adjust a routing call, then the transport's presence here this morning was not random. It was a provocation, or a test, or something more deliberate that she didn't yet have the full shape of. Her source had said, someone wanted this aircraft at this airport. She needed to understand why. What was gained by routing a military medical transport through a compromised facility? The obvious answer was that it wasn't supposed to be complicated. The transport was supposed to land, the inspection was supposed to be blocked or delayed, and the pattern of compliance was supposed to continue undisturbed. But if that was all it was, a continuation of what had been happening for 6 years, then her source wouldn't have called it significant enough to contact her on a personal line. Something about this specific transport, this specific morning, mattered in a way she wasn't seeing yet. She went back to the documentation tablet in her travel bag and pulled the transport mission brief she had read 2 days ago. 3,800 pounds of emergency medical equipment, sterile surgical supplies, portable ventilators, blood products, 2 specialized trauma response units, routed to the Harlan County Coastal Disaster Response Hub. She read the equipment manifest again, line by line. On the 4th line, she stopped. What? The 2 specialized trauma response units listed in the manifest were designated as MTR-7 configuration, which was a standard field surgical platform. She knew the spec. She had certified 3 of them during her operational years. But the serial number block listed for the 2 units didn't fall within the standard MTR-7 production range she had on file. The numbers were valid in format, correctly structured, but the block prefix was different. It was a small thing, the kind of thing you would not catch unless you had spent years certifying medical equipment and had looked at enough serial documentation to recognize when a number that was formatted correctly was still wrong in a way you couldn't immediately articulate. She photographed the manifest page and sent it through her encrypted device to the AMC logistics verification contact she'd used twice before. Then she waited. The response came in 4 minutes. The serial numbers for the 2 listed MTR-7 units were not in the Air Force Medical Equipment Registry. They were not missed files or database gaps. They simply did not exist as issued military equipment serial numbers. Claire read the response twice. Then she stood up, went to the door of the operations center, and called for Hargrove. Hargrove came out from the director's office corridor, moving quickly when she saw Claire's face. The transport manifest, Claire said, and showed her the serial number exchange on the tablet and the response from AMC Logistics. Hargrove read it again. The equipment that landed here this morning may include units that are not in the military registry, which means either there's a logging error in the manifest, possible, or someone modified what was listed in the manifest before the transport departed. Claire paused. Or the manifest was modified after the transport was in the air to show units that don't correspond to what's actually in the aircraft. Why would anyone modify a manifest to add equipment that isn't registered? I don't know yet. But the manifest is the document of record for everything aboard that aircraft. If the physical equipment matches the manifest, then there's a logging error somewhere in the registry. If the physical equipment doesn't match the manifest, she stopped. Then something is on that transport that shouldn't be, Hargrove said. The convoy is 40-something minutes from Harlan County. Hargrove was already on her radio. I need the transport convoy stopped and held at current position. Do not allow unloading to begin at the Harlan hub until we have eyes on the full manifest. This is a federal hold order. She looked at Claire while she gave the instruction. How confident are you? In the serial discrepancy? Completely confident. In what it means? I don't know yet. That's good enough. Hargrove finished the radio call, and then her phone rang and she answered it and listened. And what happened to her face while she listened made Claire's chest tighten without knowing why. When Hargrove lowered the phone, she said, Sonia Parr has been located. Where? She was at a commercial terminal 40 miles from here, attempting to board a connecting flight. She had a carry bag and a laptop. Hargrove paused. They found a second laptop in the bag, password protected, and she was not cooperative about it. They're bringing her in now. She looked at Claire directly. And Adler found Bellamy. Where is he? He's in Kettle Falls, Hargrove said. He's been in Kettle Falls since yesterday. The words landed with specific weight. Not traveling from somewhere, not in transit. He had been in the same city as this airport since the day before Claire arrived, before the transport landed, before the runway lighting failed. He came here, Claire said. He checked into a hotel 6 miles from the airport at 4 p.m. yesterday afternoon. He came here to watch, Claire said, or to manage something if it went wrong. Or both, Hargrove said. Has he been contacted? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Hargrove's expression was careful. If Bellamy is here and aware the investigation has started, he may already be trying to leave. Then you need to move now. I need an authority confirmation before I approach a former federal official. I'm making a call. She stepped away. Claire stood in the operations center corridor and processed the shape of it. A retired oversight director in a hotel 6 miles away. A woman with a laptop at a commercial terminal 40 miles away. A transport convoy stopped on a coast highway with equipment that may or may not match its own manifest. 2 other airports with similar contract structures, and a silent equity stake running through a Delaware entity that a man with federal oversight experience had used as a buffer between himself and 6 years of fraud. And somewhere inside the laptop Sonia Parr had been carrying, presumably, was something she had thought was worth bringing with her when she ran. Hargrove came back. Authority confirmed. We're moving on Bellamy now, but there's a problem. Claire waited. He checked out of the hotel 11 minutes ago. The corridor went very quiet. He knows, Claire said. Either someone told him or he saw enough of the federal vehicle activity at this airport to work it out. Hargrove's radio came alive with 2 voices talking over each other, and she held it up and listened and then said, He rented a car at the hotel, dark blue sedan, state plates. She relayed the plate number into the radio. I need a regional intercept, all access routes from the hotel toward the interstate. He has an 11-minute head start. The radio traffic multiplied. Claire stood in the middle of it and understood that the next 20 minutes were going to determine whether Conrad Bellamy, the person who might be the structural keystone of 6 years of fraud across multiple federal facilities, was going to be in a room answering questions today, or whether he was going to be a 3-day problem requiring interstate coordination and jurisdictional negotiations and attorneys who would have 3 days to build walls. And then her encrypted device rang. Not a radio call. A direct incoming connection, encrypted handshake, source verified, the kind of channel that took deliberate setup on both ends. She answered. It was her source. VP. And the voice was different now. Clipped, urgent, stripped of the careful pacing from earlier. Claire stopped the laptop. What? Whatever laptop your people found on Sonia Parr, don't let your team access it through standard forensics. Don't let them plug it into anything. The device may be configured to purge on unauthorized access attempts, and what's on it is not just financial records. A pause, tight and controlled. There's a name on that laptop that connects this to something much larger than an airport contract, and if the data is lost, you lose the only hard link that exists. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand, Claire said. What's the name? I can't give it to you over this line, but when you see it, You'll know it. And when you see it, Claire, another pause. Be very careful about who you tell first. The line closed. She lowered the device. Down the corridor, Hargrove was coordinating the intercept on Bellamy's vehicle. 3 conversations running simultaneously, the investigation expanding outward in all directions at once. In a holding location 40 miles away, a laptop was sitting in an evidence bag, waiting to be opened. Claire looked at the encrypted device in her hand and thought about her source's last words. Be very careful about who you tell first, and the specific, deliberate way they had been spoken, like a warning that had a target, not just a direction. She put the device in her jacket pocket and walked toward Hargrove, and she made a decision in those 12 steps that she didn't yet have enough information to be certain about, which was exactly the kind of decision that the next 30 minutes was going to tell her was either right or catastrophically wrong. She reached Hargrove's side. The laptop, she said. Tell your forensics team not to attempt access yet. I need you to trust me on this for the next 30 minutes. Hargrove turned and looked at her with the expression of a senior investigator being asked to pause a critical evidence action by someone who was technically a witness and an inspection specialist, not a member of her team, not under her command, and not authorized to make forensic decisions. The look lasted 4 seconds. 30 minutes, Hargrove said. Talk fast. Talk fast was not an invitation Claire took lightly, and she didn't waste the 30 minutes Hargrove had given her by starting with anything she couldn't prove. She started with the call. Not the content of it, not yet, but the fact of it. An encrypted direct channel connection from a source with prior operational credibility, warning that the laptop carried a self-destruct configuration tied to unauthorized access attempts. She explained it in 40 seconds. Hargrove listened without interrupting, which meant she was taking it seriously. How does your source know what's on the device? Hargrove said. I don't know. They didn't explain and I didn't have time to ask. That's not nothing as a problem. I know. But if they're right and the forensics team plugs it into a standard extraction system and the drive purges, we lose whatever is on it. If they're wrong and we wait 30 minutes, we lose 30 minutes. Claire looked at her steadily. What's the cost of waiting against the cost of losing the data permanently? Hargrove made the call to the forensics team in less than a minute. Hold on access. Bag it, log it, do not attempt entry. The team lead pushed back briefly. Standard extraction protocol, chain of custody requirements, and Hargrove overrode it with the kind of flat authority that didn't invite further discussion. Then she looked at Claire. 26 minutes. I need a secure line to my AMC logistics contact and access to whatever your team has pulled on Millward Logistics Group so far. Hargrove pointed her to the workstation Adler had been using, now vacant. Claire sat down and worked. The Millward Logistics Group corporate filing had come back with a full registration history. The Delaware formation, the administrative officers, the registered agent, all standard buffer structure, exactly what you used when you wanted an entity to exist legally while making the actual ownership difficult to trace quickly. But corporate registrations in Delaware required at least one named director at formation, and the formation document showed a single director listed at the time of filing, a name that appeared in no other federal database search the investigators had run. The name was Terrence Hole. Claire ran it through the AMC Logistics contact, not because she expected a match, but because the contact had access to a cross-referenced database that pulled across multiple federal systems simultaneously. She sent the query and waited. While she waited, she looked at the Millward formation date again. 14 months before Vantage Civil received its first Ironwood contract. She looked at the first Ironwood contract award date. She looked at the name of the federal contracting official who had approved that award, Conrad Bellamy. She already knew that. But she was building the sequence in order because the sequence mattered. The order in which things happened was the argument, and the argument had to be airtight before she could use it for anything. Formation of Millward. Award of Vantage Civil Contract by Bellamy. Bellamy's office approves 6 years of renewals. Bellamy retires. Bellamy joins PAR's advisory practice through the buffer of a consulting engagement. Bellamy arrives in Kettle Falls the day before a federal inspection that could expose the entire structure. He hadn't come to watch. He had come to intervene if something went wrong. The AMC contact responded. Terrence Hole appeared in the cross-referenced database exactly once, in a federal aviation procurement record from 9 years ago. He was listed as a technical advisor on a contract evaluation panel. The panel chair for that evaluation was Conrad Bellamy. Claire stared at the screen. Bellamy hadn't just been connected to Millward through the oversight process. He had a personal connection to the man who had formed the entity in the first place. Terrence Hole was not a random administrative name. He was a former colleague, and almost certainly a front, a name used to establish an LLC while the actual beneficial owner remained invisible. She printed the result and stood up. Hargrove read the printout in the time it took to walk from the workstation to the corridor, and her expression moved through two distinct phases. The first was the controlled recognition of a significant development, and the second was something closer to anger, quiet and compressed. Bellamy formed Millward, she said. He used Hole as a name director to keep himself off the formation document. Then he ran the oversight process that awarded and renewed the contracts to the company he partially owned through the entity he created. And when prior investigations flagged Millward as an associated entity in two separate procurement cases, he was in a position to ensure those investigations closed without charges, Claire said, because he ran the office that conducted them. Hargrove folded the printout once, sharply. This is not a corrupt airport director skimming maintenance contracts. This is a federal official who built the corruption into the oversight system from the inside. And Bellamy is currently in a car with an 11-minute head start. Hargrove's radio was already at her mouth. The intercept order had been out for 20 minutes, but it was a regional effort on a secondary highway network, and Bellamy had chosen his checkout time carefully, just outside the window where a rapid response was cleanest. The radio traffic from the intercept teams was fragmented. One team on the northern access route, one on the interstate on-ramp, one sitting at the county line, because the county sheriff had been brought in to assist, and county coordination always added friction. Claire listened to the traffic and did the geography in her head. From the hotel to the interstate was roughly 14 miles. At normal speed, call it 18 minutes. Bellamy had checked out 23 minutes ago. He could already be on the interstate. Then the radio traffic shifted. One of the intercept teams, the one on the northern access route, calling in a sighting, dark blue sedan, state plates matching, pulled into a gas station 2 miles from the on-ramp. Vehicle stationary, single occupant. Hargrove gave the instruction to approach and hold, do not detain, maintain visual. She did not want Bellamy to know he'd been spotted until there was a federal agent standing at his window with paperwork in hand. The team confirmed. She looked at Claire. We have him. For now. For now, Claire agreed, because a man parked at a gas station could become a man who drove away in any direction at any moment, and there was still the question of what authority Hargrove had to formally detain a retired federal official whose name appeared in corporate filings, but against whom no charge had yet been formally articulated. The forensics team, Claire said. What's our clock on the laptop? Specialist is being flown in from the regional office. 90 minutes out. She has the hardware for a read-only forensic mirror that won't trigger a purge configuration if one exists. Hargrove paused. Your source was right about the risk, by the way. The team lead looked up the device model after I called the hold. It's a commercial laptop with a third-party security firmware package that includes a remote wipe and a tamper detection wipe. Standard extraction would have triggered it within the first 30 seconds. Claire absorbed that without comment. Her source had known the specific device configuration. That was not general knowledge. That was knowledge from someone who had been close enough to this network to know what tools they used. She filed that thought for later. Sonia Parr, she said. Is she talking? Not yet. Her attorney is on the way. Hargrove paused. But the carry bag she had at the terminal, the documents inside it, physical copies, printed. The team is going through them now. What kind of documents? Payment records. Looks like internal accounting. Not the official Vantage civil books, but a parallel set. Handwritten notations on some of them. She met Claire's eyes. She was running with the real ledger. Look. The real ledger was 11 pages of printed spreadsheet with handwritten margin notes, and it told a story that was significantly uglier than $4.3 million over 6 years. The base contract payments to Vantage Civil were there, itemized quarterly, matching the official records almost exactly. But the supplemental work orders that Hargrove had flagged earlier were also there, listed separately, and the total on those was $2.8 million across 6 years, paid through a secondary invoicing entity called Parr Infrastructure Advisory, the same consulting practice that employed Conrad Bellamy. The money had moved in a loop. Federal contract payments to Vantage Civil, A portion of those payments invoiced to a second entity for consulting services. That second entity employing the man who had approved the contracts in the first place. Clean on paper because each transaction was documented, structured, and separated by at least one corporate layer from the next. But the handwritten notations in the margin of the ledger were not clean. They were the kind of notations that someone made when they were keeping track of things that couldn't go into the official version. Internal accounting for internal purposes, the kind of record that only existed because the person who kept it didn't entirely trust the other parties involved and wanted leverage. Sonia Parr had been keeping leverage. One notation appeared 4 times across the document, CB, quarterly confirmed. Next to a dollar figure, 4 quarters per year, 6 years of records, 24 entries. The quarterly payments designated for CB, Conrad Bellamy, were routed through the Parr Infrastructure Advisory invoices and totaled, across the full record, just over $900,000. Hargrove had the ledger in a clear evidence sleeve when she walked Claire through it, and she was controlled, but the set of her shoulders was not. $900,000, she said, paid to a former federal official through a consulting arrangement for 6 years, while that official was actively running the oversight office responsible for the contracts generating the money. He wasn't just connected to this, Claire said. He was a paid participant, quarterly, regular as a salary. She kept the receipts, Hargrove said, and there was something in her voice that was almost disbelief, not at the fraud, but at the fact that it had been documented so precisely by someone inside the arrangement. Why would she keep this? Because Jeffrey Parr and Malcolm Dyer were the visible targets if anything ever came apart, Claire said. Parr's company, Dyer's airport. If investigators came, they'd find Parr and Dyer first. Sonia is Dyer's sister. She was in the middle. If Parr or Dyer decided to reduce their exposure by pointing at each other, she needed something to point back with. She was insuring herself against her own partners. And she was insuring herself against Bellamy, too. Claire looked at the margin notation, CB, quarterly confirmed, 4 times across the document. She has a record of his payments. He doesn't know she kept it. If he did, she probably wouldn't have been the one running with the ledger. Hargrove looked at the document for a moment longer. Then she looked up. The intercept team has Bellamy at the gas station. I have enough for a formal approach. I'm going now. She paused. Do you want to be there? Claire thought about it. The direct answer was yes. Every part of her professional instinct said yes. But she thought about what her source had said. Be very careful about who you tell first. She had been careful. She had given the Bellamy information to Hargrove, who was the right person to act on it. But the warning suggested there was still something she didn't know, some element of the network that hadn't surfaced yet. And being present at Bellamy's approach meant being away from the airport for 40 minutes in each direction. No, she said. I'll stay here. There's still the manifest discrepancy. Hargrove nodded once and moved. The manifest discrepancy had been sitting at the edge of Claire's attention since she'd first sent the serial number query to AMC Logistics, and she went back to it now with the operations center almost quiet. 2 investigators working documentation at the far end, Adler on a phone call in the corridor, the airport outside in a strange suspended state, neither working nor shut down, but somewhere between. She pulled the transport manifest again on the workstation and read through the full equipment list. Not just the 2 MTR-7 units with the unregistered serial numbers, but everything. 3,800 pounds of material, itemized by category, serial number where applicable. The surgical supplies and blood products were straightforward. Lot numbers matching standard military medical logistics records. Cold chain documentation attached. The ventilators were logged correctly. The MTR-7 units were the anomaly. She cross-referenced the manifest against the transport's departure documentation. The load plan filed at the origin base before the aircraft left at 0400. The load plan listed the same 2 MTR-7 units with different serial numbers, not unregistered numbers. Registered, valid, existing in the AMC equipment database. The serial numbers on the manifest had been changed after the load plan was filed. Someone had modified the manifest in transit, after the aircraft departed, before it landed, to replace 2 valid registered equipment serial numbers with 2 numbers that did not exist in any military registry. The practical effect of that modification was that the physical units on the aircraft, the ones with the actual valid serial numbers, were now not what the landing manifest said they were. If the physical units were checked against the manifest at the Harlan County hub, They wouldn't match. She worked through what that meant. It meant someone wanted there to be a discrepancy at the receiving end, not a discrepancy that would stop the delivery. The medical supplies would still be unloaded, the equipment would still reach the disaster response zone, but a discrepancy that would generate a documentation flag, a flag that would go into the logistics system, require resolution through administrative channels, and in the process create a record showing that the equipment delivered to Harlan County was not precisely what the manifest said. That record could be used in a procurement dispute. It could be used to question the integrity of the delivery chain. It could, if the right person was looking at it, be used to cast doubt on whether the mission had been properly executed, and by extension, on whether the inspection process that preceded the landing had been properly conducted. It was a setup, not for the transport crew, for the inspection record. If Claire's inspection resulted in a landing clearance, and the manifest showed equipment anomalies at the receiving end, the anomalies would be attached in the documentation chain to the inspection that authorized the landing. Her authorization, her record. She sat back from the workstation and felt the shape of it with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite admiration, and was mostly the cold, focused clarity of understanding a plan that had been designed specifically for her. They had known she was coming. They had blocked her at the perimeter. They had also prepared for the possibility that she got through, because Bellamy was not a man who relied on a single layer. If Rourke stopped her, problem solved. If Rourke didn't stop her, the landing happened, and the manifest discrepancy created a documentation trail that would follow Claire's authorization into the record and give anyone who wanted to challenge her work a paper handle to grab. She picked up her encrypted device and called her AMC Logistics contact directly. Voice call this time, not a query. "The manifest modification," she said when the contact answered. "I need to know who had access to the transport's documentation system between 0400 departure and 0740 approach. Who could have made changes to a filed manifest in transit?" The contact was quiet for a moment. "That system is supposed to be locked after departure. In-flight manifest changes require a two-person authorization through the base logistics desk." "Supposed to be." "There's a secondary access level for emergency logistics updates. It requires different credentials." "Who holds those credentials?" "It varies by assignment. Base logistics officers, AMC duty officers, and..." A pause. "And the Regional Contracting Oversight Office maintains emergency access for procurement verification purposes." "The Oversight Office," Claire said. "That's the policy. It dates from a standing arrangement set up about 8 years ago." 8 years ago, 2 years before Bellamy became regional director. He would have inherited the arrangement, and when he retired, the credentials didn't automatically transfer. They had to be formally revoked. Had they been revoked? "I need to know if the emergency access credentials for that system were formally revoked when the prior regional director retired 18 months ago," she said. Another pause, longer. "I'm going to have to check that internally. That's not something I have in front of me. How fast? Give me an hour." She didn't have an hour, but she said she'd wait and ended the call. Adler appeared in the doorway of the operations center. "We have a problem." She turned. "The intercept team reached Bellamy at the gas station," Adler said. Hargrove approached him. He was cooperative, too cooperative. He produced identification, answered questions, acknowledged being in Kettle Falls for a private consulting engagement. Adler paused. Then he showed Hargrove a document. "What document?" "A notification letter from the Inspector General's office, dated 11 days ago." Adler's expression was controlled but tight. "It states that Conrad Bellamy has been designated as a confidential source in an active federal investigation, and that any contact with him by law enforcement personnel must be coordinated through the IG Liaison Office." The room stayed very quiet. "He's already a source," Claire said. "That's what the letter says." "In whose investigation?" "The IG's office. The letter doesn't specify the subject matter." Adler looked at her carefully. "Hargrove is on the phone with the IG liaison right now. She can't detain him until she knows whether the designation is legitimate and what investigation it covers." "If it's legitimate," Claire said. "If." "Who issued the letter?" "It's signed by a deputy IG. Name is Fowler. Hargrove's team is verifying the signature now." Adler paused. "But if it's real, if Bellamy is actually a designated confidential source in an active IG investigation, then approaching him without coordination could compromise whatever they're running. Or Bellamy produced a document that looks legitimate enough to slow us down while he makes his next move, Claire said. Also possible. How long does verification take? Hargrove says 30 minutes minimum to get someone at the IG office who can confirm. 30 minutes. Again. The same window as the laptop. Bellamy had arrived at the gas station with just enough documentation to create exactly the right amount of delay, not enough to stop the investigation permanently, but enough to buy time. Time for what exactly, was the question. Claire looked at the workstation, the manifest discrepancy, the access credentials that might not have been revoked, the laptop in an evidence bag 40 miles away, waiting for a forensics specialist who was 90 minutes out. Tell Hargrove to verify the IG letter, she said, and tell her to confirm specifically whether the active investigation Bellamy is supposedly a source in, whether it covers federal aviation contracting in this region. Adler looked at her. Why specifically that? Because if it does, Claire said, then either Bellamy turned himself into a source to get ahead of exactly this moment, or someone in the IG's office has been running a parallel investigation into the same network we're looking at right now. And nobody told us. Adler went back to the corridor in his phone. Claire turned back to the workstation. She pulled up the Vantage Civil Registration one more time, the full document, and read through to the interest holder section again. Millward Logistics Group, 22% equity, Conrad Bellamy's entity. She kept reading past that section, past the standard boilerplate, past the registered agent information, to the very last page of the filing, which was a standard amendment record showing any changes to the registration since its original formation. There had been one amendment, filed 4 months ago, a transfer of the Millward equity interest, the 22% stake, from Millward Logistics Group to a new entity. The new entity was called ClearPath Advisory Partners. She had not seen that name anywhere in the investigation documentation. She ran it through the search system on the workstation, pulling whatever was available. ClearPath Advisory Partners, registered 6 months ago. Corporate address in the same Delaware County as Millward, administrative officers, registered agent, all the same buffer structure. And the named director at formation was not Terrence Hull this time. The named director of ClearPath Advisory Partners was a woman named Patricia Fowler. Claire's hands went still on the keyboard. Fowler. The same name as the deputy IG who had signed Bellamy's source designation letter. She sat with that for exactly 4 seconds. Then she stood up and walked to the corridor where Adler was on the phone, and she waited the 8 seconds it took for him to finish his sentence, and then she said, "Tell Hargrove not to call the IG liaison office. Not yet. Tell her to hold Bellamy at that gas station on whatever ground she can justify, and to call me directly right now." Adler looked at her. "What's—" "The deputy IG who signed his letter," Claire said. "Her name is Fowler. She is the named director of the entity that currently holds the equity stake in the company at the center of this fraud." She kept her voice flat and even. "We may have a problem inside the oversight structure, and I need Hargrove to know that before she makes any calls to anyone she doesn't personally know and trust." Adler's expression shifted through several stages in rapid succession. Then he brought the phone back up and started talking. Claire walked back to the workstation. She looked at the name on the screen, Patricia Fowler, ClearPath Advisory Partners, formation date 6 months ago, and she understood that this was what her source had meant. When you see it, you'll know it. And be very careful about who you tell first. Not a warning about the investigation in general. A warning about the specific moment when the network's reach became visible. When it became clear that the corruption wasn't just in the airport, or the contractor, or the retired official at the gas station. It had a door into the system that was supposed to investigate it. Her encrypted device rang. It was Hargrove calling from the intercept site, Bellamy still sitting in his car, 30 feet away. "Talk to me," Hargrove said. "The source designation letter Bellamy produced," Claire said. "It's signed by a deputy IG named Fowler." "I know. I was about to call her office." "Don't," Claire said. "I need you to look at something first. Patricia Fowler is the named director of a corporate entity called ClearPath Advisory Partners. That entity acquired the Vantage Civil equity stake 4 months ago, the equity that was previously held by Millward Logistics Group." She paused. "The deputy IG whose signature is on the document protecting Conrad Bellamy from detention is a named officer of the company that currently owns a stake in the fraud we are investigating. The silence on the line lasted long enough that Claire could hear road noise from the intercept site. Then Hargrove said very quietly, "He didn't come here to watch, and he didn't come here to intervene if something went wrong." Another pause. "He came here because he thought the source designation would protect him if we got this far. And whoever signed that letter, whether Fowler is dirty or her signature was forged, someone inside the oversight structure built him an exit." "Yes," Claire said. "Can I hold him on the manifest modification, the in-transit access?" "You can try. You'll need the AMC credentials verification to make it stick, and that's still an hour out." "I can hold him on obstruction for the log deletion. I can tie him to Dyer through the Millward formation documents." Hargrove's voice was working through options quickly. "That's thin for a former federal official with a signed IG letter in his hand." "It's thin," Claire agreed. "But you have the ledger, the quarterly payments." CB, confirmed, $900,000, 6 years of records kept by his own partner's wife, specifically because she didn't trust him. Claire looked at the ClearPath registration on the screen. "And you have the equity transfer. 4 months ago, he moved the stake into a new entity. That's not routine maintenance of a holding structure. That's someone anticipating scrutiny and trying to put distance between themselves and the asset before investigators found it. He knew an investigation was coming. He knew because he is inside the system that would have generated the investigation referral." Claire said it simply, without heat. "He had time to build the exit. He just didn't have time to finish it." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm going to detain him. I'm going to document every reason I have, and I'm going to flag the Fowler connection immediately to a channel that doesn't run through the regional IG office. That's going to take about 4 minutes to set up. I'll be here." "Claire." A pause, different from the others. "This is going to get complicated before it gets simple." "I know," Claire said. "Are you all right?" It was a question nobody had asked her since 6 in the morning when a woman had torn her flight pass in half and told her to leave. She stood in the operations center of Ironwood Municipal Airport, soaking wet 3 hours ago, and now dry but tired in the specific way of someone who had been running on procedure and urgency since before dawn, and she thought about whether she was all right. "I'm fine," she said. "Go get him." The call ended. She sat down at the workstation and looked at the ClearPath Advisory Partners registration and the name Patricia Fowler in the director field, and she thought about the shape of what they had built. Bellamy and Dyer and Parr and the women in their families and the official with the deputy title and the signed letter. A structure designed to self-protect, to redirect scrutiny, to survive investigation by being partially inside the thing that was supposed to investigate it. It was careful work, patient work, the kind that took years to build and required that everyone involved trusted, everyone else involved just enough to stay in it and not quite enough to feel safe. And then her personal phone rang again. Not the encrypted device. Her personal phone. The contact name on the screen was not VP this time. It was a name she had not expected to see today, had not spoken to in 3 years, and whose appearance on her screen at this specific moment felt like the last piece of a shape she had not yet fully seen. She looked at it for 2 rings. Then she answered, and the voice on the other end said 4 words before she could speak. And those 4 words rearranged everything she thought she understood about why she had been sent to Ironwood Municipal Airport this morning. The 4 words were, "It was always you." Claire stood in the operations center with the phone against her ear and the ClearPath registration still glowing on the workstation screen in front of her, and she said nothing for a moment because she needed to be certain she had heard correctly, and because the voice itself, low, unhurried, carrying the particular weight of someone who had been holding something for a long time, was not a voice she had prepared herself to hear today. The name on her screen had been listed in her contacts for 3 years as D. Ray. She had worked with Darren Ray for 11 months during her second operational assignment, before he transferred to a federal aviation security unit, and she moved into inspection work, and they had stayed in the loose, intermittent contact of 2 people who respected each other enough to check in occasionally and trusted each other enough not to need to explain the gaps. "Darren," she said, "you found Fowler's name. How do you know that?" "Because you answered the phone," he said. "If you hadn't found it yet, you wouldn't have answered. You'd have let it ring and called me back when you had a clearer picture." That was accurate enough that she didn't argue it. "Tell me what you know," she said. "I know that VP called you this morning," he said. I know because VP is Vera Pellman, and Vera works with my unit, and she told me she made the call. She wanted you warned before you walked into something you didn't have the full map for. Vera Pellman. Claire filed the name. Your unit has been running a parallel investigation. For 8 months? The Millward structure, the Vantage civil contracts, the connection to Bellamy. We were 6 weeks from a formal referral package. A pause. And then 3 weeks ago, an inspection request got filed for a military transport landing at Ironwood Municipal, and the assigned inspector was you, and that was either a coincidence or it wasn't. You think the routing was deliberate, Claire said. Someone pushed the transport through Ironwood to accelerate something. Someone pushed it through Ironwood because they knew an inspection request would follow, and they knew the inspection request would go to the AMC aeromedical roster, and the person at the top of that roster for this region was you. Darren's voice was steady and careful. They wanted you there, Claire. Not to stop you, to use you. She looked at the ClearPath registration on the screen. Fowler. Fowler has been trying to close our investigation from inside the IG's office for 4 months. She can't kill it outright. Too many people know it exists. But she can slow it, redirect it, and if she could get an outside inspection to land at Ironwood and create a documentation record that muddied the evidentiary picture, it would give her grounds to argue contamination of the evidence chain when our referral package finally hit. The manifest modification, Claire said. The serial number change. If I had authorized a landing on a manifest that turned out to be altered, my authorization record would be attached to an evidence anomaly. And Fowler's office would have argued that the inspection process itself was compromised, that any evidence gathered at Ironwood on the day of your inspection was tainted by procedural irregularities. He paused. It wouldn't have killed the case, but it would have delayed it by 6 months minimum while the procedural challenge was adjudicated. And 6 months is enough time to move money, restructure entities, and make certain documents very difficult to locate. Claire sat down. Not because she was tired. She was tired, but that wasn't why. She sat down because she wanted to think clearly, and standing had started to feel like a performance. The manifest modification was done through emergency access credentials, she said, credentials that belonged to Bellamy's oversight office and may not have been formally revoked when he retired. They weren't revoked, Darren said. We confirmed that 8 weeks ago. Bellamy has had active emergency logistics access to the AMC documentation system since he retired. He used it to modify the manifest at 0542 this morning, 42 minutes after the transport departed. You have that. We have the access log from the AMC system, time-stamped and credential verified. It was one of the cleanest pieces of evidence in our package. He paused. Which is why I need you to understand something. Our investigation, the one Fowler has been trying to dismantle, it's not dead. What happened at Ironwood this morning didn't contaminate it. Your inspection was clean, your authorization was correct, and the manifest discrepancy is now evidence of Bellamy's fraud rather than a mark against your record. But the case needs to move fast now, because Fowler knows we're close, and she'll use whatever time she has. Hargrove is detaining Bellamy right now, Claire said. She has the ledger, the corporate registration, the ClearPath connection. She's flagging Fowler through a channel outside the regional IG office. Good, he said. That's the right move. Who's her channel? I don't know specifically. She said she'd use someone she personally knew and trusted. Tell her to go through Deputy Director Ansel at the DOJ Aviation Fraud Division, not the IG. Not any channel that Fowler could have reached. Ansel has had our investigation referral on a pre-read basis for 6 weeks. He knows this case. Claire wrote the name on the back of an evidence form she found on the workstation desk. Hargrove will want to know who you are. Tell her I'm the reason the investigation existed before today. She can verify through Ansel. A brief pause. Claire, I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. When Rourke blocked you at the checkpoint this morning, when Dyer dismissed you, when you were standing outside the perimeter with no documentation and a broken radio pass, what did you think was going to happen? She considered the question honestly, the way it deserved. I thought I was going to have to find another way in. I didn't think it was going to work out easily. It didn't. But you stayed. The transport was coming, she said. Staying wasn't a decision. It was just the only thing that made sense. He was quiet for a moment. 8 months of investigative work, he said finally. And the thing that cracked it open was you standing in a fog-covered parking lot at 6 in the morning refusing to leave. Another pause. I wanted you to know that, before this gets procedural and formal and everyone starts writing reports. She didn't respond to that immediately, because there wasn't a clean response to it, and she wasn't going to manufacture one. She looked at the workstation, at the ClearPath registration, at the name Patricia Fowler in the director field. I need to go, she said. I have things to finish here. I know, go finish them. She ended the call and sat for exactly 15 more seconds, not resting, just letting the full shape of the morning assemble itself clearly in her mind one time before she moved back into it. Then she stood up, took the evidence form with Ansell's name on it, and went to find Hargrove's communications officer. The next 4 hours were procedural in the way that the most consequential things often were. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the slow and deliberate work of building something that would hold. Hargrove detained Bellamy at the gas station on 3 documented grounds: the Millward Formation connection, the quarterly payments recorded in Sonia Parr's ledger, and the AMC credentials access log that Darren Ray's unit released to Hargrove directly within 20 minutes of Claire's call. The IG source designation letter sat in an evidence bag in Hargrove's vehicle, because the minute Ansell's office was brought into the chain, the legitimacy of Fowler's signature became a separate criminal matter rather than a procedural shield. Bellamy did not run. He sat in his dark blue rental car at the gas station, and he answered some questions and declined others and asked for his attorney twice, and the third time he asked, the attorney arrived. By then it didn't matter much. The credentials log was clean. The ledger was in an evidence sleeve. The ClearPath registration connected Fowler's name to the equity stake in a company at the center of 6 years of federal contract fraud, and that connection was now in the hands of a DOJ division that had been building toward exactly this moment for 8 months. The attorney looked at the documentation and spoke quietly to Bellamy for 11 minutes, and then Bellamy made a decision that surprised no one who understood how these things ended. He asked to speak to investigators without his attorney present. The attorney objected. Bellamy overrode him. And what Bellamy said in the next 90 minutes, recorded and witnessed and formally documented, was the last piece that closed the structure from the inside. He confirmed the Millward Formation. He confirmed the quarterly payments. He confirmed that Patricia Fowler had been aware of the arrangement for 2 years, brought in not through the equity stake, which she had acquired through ClearPath as a late addition, but through a prior consulting relationship with Parr Infrastructure Advisory that predated her appointment to the Deputy IG position by 8 months. She had not been clean when she was appointed. Someone had missed it, or someone had not looked. He confirmed the manifest modification. He confirmed the AMC credentials, and that he had used them at 0542. And he confirmed, in the flat and exhausted voice of someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long and was finally setting it down, that the transport routing through Ironwood had been suggested to a mid-level AMC operations contact by Jeffrey Parr through a third party 6 weeks ago, before Claire had filed the inspection request, before anyone had flagged the runway lighting discrepancy publicly, before the formal anomaly report had gone anywhere beyond Claire's own desk. They had not been reacting to her inspection request. They had arranged for the transport to come to Ironwood first, and the inspection request had followed because that was procedure, because an AMC medical transport landing at a field with prior anomaly flags automatically triggered an inspection requirement, and the inspection requirement automatically went to the regional roster, and the regional roster put Claire at the top. They had used the system's own rules to put her in their path, and then they had tried to use her presence against themselves. It was, Claire thought when she read the summary of Bellamy's statement, a genuinely sophisticated plan. It had failed not because of a single mistake, but because of an accumulation of things that individually might have been manageable. Garrett's denied maintenance requests, which he'd documented. Tillman's scanner reading, which he'd remembered accurately. The independent camera in the operations center, which Dyer hadn't known about. Sonia Parr's parallel ledger, which she'd kept for self-protection. And Darren Ray's 8-month investigation, which had been running quiet and careful and just far enough ahead of Fowler's interference to survive it, and the woman in the parking lot who had refused to leave. Patricia Fowler was placed on administrative leave by the Inspector General's office at 2:40 in the afternoon, pending a formal review of her appointment process and her connection to the ClearPath entity. The leave notice came through the DOJ channel Hargrove had opened through Ansell's office, and it moved quickly because Ansell had been waiting for exactly this kind of documented connection for 8 months, and he did not need to be convinced to act. Fowler did not go quietly. She called 3 people in the first 20 minutes, 2 of them in federal oversight positions, one of them a congressional liaison office, and each of those calls was logged and noted and added to the investigative record. Because when a person under formal review starts making calls to officials, the calls become evidence of the network's shape. Each call she made was a line on a map. She didn't call Bellamy. She knew by then that Bellamy was talking. Jeffrey Parr was located at a commercial address in a city 2 hours from Kettle Falls, at the offices of Parr Infrastructure Advisory, where he had apparently been working through his normal schedule as if nothing was happening. 2 federal investigators arrived at 11:40 in the morning, and he was still at his desk. He came without incident, which was either a sign of composure or a sign that he had already concluded that resistance was not a useful strategy. His attorney was involved within the hour, and the Parr Infrastructure Advisory offices were placed under a federal document preservation order before the end of the afternoon. Malcolm Dyer was formally removed as airport director at 1:15 p.m., effective immediately, by order of the federal authority that had placed Ironwood Municipal under temporary federal control that morning. He had spent the hours since his attorney arrived in a posture of controlled, careful silence. Not the professional calm he'd worn at the checkpoint, but the specific silence of someone who understood that the walls were close and getting closer, and that the only variable left was how much worse he was going to make it for himself. When the removal order came through, his attorney read it, and Dyer said nothing. He signed the acknowledgement form. He stood up. He walked out of his office without taking anything from the desk. The office had been under investigator access for 6 hours by then anyway. There was nothing on the desk he would have been allowed to take. Rourke's cooperation continued through the afternoon. She was not going to escape consequences. She understood that, her attorney understood that, and the documentation of what she had done to the maintenance corridor and the guidance units and the evidence logs was too specific and too well corroborated to be mitigated entirely by cooperation. But cooperation mattered, and what she gave investigators in the afternoon was more than what she'd given in the morning. A detailed account of the specific instructions Dyer had given her over 2 years, the dates and methods of the corridor access, and most valuably, confirmation of a cash payment she had received directly, not through any contracting structure, from an envelope handed to her by Dyer in the airport parking lot 14 months ago. She had a photograph of the envelope. She had kept it for the same reason Sonia Parr had kept the ledger. Everyone in this network had been holding something against everyone else, and when the structure started collapsing, those private insurance policies became the instruments of the collapse. The forensic specialist arrived at 3:20 p.m. from the regional office, carrying equipment in a hard-sided case that she set up with efficient professionalism in a cleared conference room. She was younger than Claire expected, late 20s, with the focused economy of movement that came from doing precise technical work under time pressure regularly. Her name was Dr. Taryn Osei, and she looked at the laptop in its evidence bag and asked 2 questions: who last attempted access and when? Nobody had attempted access. The hold had held. Osei nodded and opened her case and began setting up a hardware write blocker with a forensic mirror system, and Claire watched from the doorway for a few minutes before Hargrove pulled her away. "Let her work," Hargrove said. "It'll take time." "How much?" She said 2 to 3 hours for a clean mirror, then analysis. Hargrove looked at her sideways. "You should eat something." "I'm fine." "You've been here since 6 in the morning and it's past 3. Eat something." There was a vending machine in the break room that had produced, under pressure, a granola bar and something that claimed to be a turkey sandwich in plastic wrap. Claire ate both of them standing at the window overlooking the North Airfield, watching the portable guidance array on runway 4 catch the afternoon sun. Garrett's crew had been cleared to break it down at 2 o'clock, and they were halfway through the process, moving with the unhurried efficiency of people who had done hard work under pressure earlier in the day and were now doing the quieter work of putting things back in order. She thought about Garrett, his denied maintenance requests, his careful documentation, his honesty with the investigators when he said he'd been scared. He had known something was wrong for months. He had not known what to do with that knowledge in a system where the person who was supposed to receive it was the person perpetuating the problem. That was a specific kind of helplessness that didn't get talked about enough. When you see clearly and can't make anyone see with you. She understood it from the other direction. The anomaly in the maintenance logs 3 weeks ago, her supervisor telling her she might be overreading it. Submitting the inspection request anyway because the alternative was letting it go, and she had never been good at letting things go when the math didn't add up. The turkey sandwich was not good. She ate it anyway. The laptop yielded its contents to Osei's forensic mirror at 5:57 p.m., and what came off it took another 40 minutes to sort through because the file structure was not organized the way a person organized files when they expected someone else to read them. It was organized the way a person organized files when they expected to be the only person reading them, quickly, functionally, using shorthand and abbreviations, and a folder structure that had evolved over time without any thought for external legibility. Osei worked with a document analyst from Hargrove's team, and together they identified the significant files in just over an hour. There were communications, not email, but encrypted message logs exported from a secure platform, showing exchanges between Sonia Parr, Jeffrey Parr, and a contact listed only as CB. The messages spanned 4 years. They were not incriminating in an obvious way. No one wrote, "Let's commit fraud" in a message log they kept. But the pattern of them, read in sequence, showed the coordination of the maintenance access schedule, the guidance unit inspection handoff to Vantage Civil, and most significantly, a series of messages from 14 months ago discussing the possibility that an AMC inspection cycle might flag Ironwood and how to ensure it didn't become a problem. CB's response in that exchange was direct. "I have the routing desk. I'll manage what comes through." Bellamy. He had managed what came through the inspection routing for 4 years, redirecting or absorbing potential flags before they became formal requests. The reason? Claire's anomaly report 3 weeks ago had resulted in an inspection request rather than a quiet administrative resolution was that Bellamy had already retired. His access to the routing system was technical, through preserved credentials, not administrative. He could modify a manifest in transit. He could not stop an inspection request from being filed and processed through the normal system without his name on the approval. That was the gap. The one he hadn't closed before he left. And 3 weeks ago, an inspection request had slipped through it. The final file Osei flagged was a document Sonia Parr had titled, without apparent irony, simply List. It was a 2-page document with names, 12 of them, each with a brief notation. Some notations were dollar amounts, some were dates, some were descriptions of roles or relationships. Patricia Fowler was on the list. The notation next to her name was IG appointment, arranged through M. Kessler referral, aware of structure from month 3. The name M. Kessler appeared nowhere else in the investigation documentation. Hargrove read the list at 7:15 p.m., standing at the conference room table with the document analyst and Adler and Claire, and when she finished reading it, she set it down carefully and said, "This goes to Ansel tonight. All of it. We don't sit on this." Nobody disagreed. The formal federal action at Ironwood Municipal Airport was announced publicly on the following morning in a press release issued jointly by the DOJ Aviation Fraud Division and the Air Mobility Command Public Affairs Office. It named Malcolm Dyer, Jeffrey Parr, Conrad Bellamy, and Patricia Fowler as subjects of a federal investigation into contract fraud, obstruction of federal oversight, falsification of safety certifications, and abuse of federal authority. It noted that the airport had been placed under federal operational control and that all military transport operations through the facility were suspended pending a full safety and administrative review. It did not name Dana Rourke by name because Rourke's status as a cooperating witness was documented separately, and her public identification at that stage would have complicated the ongoing investigation. It did not name Sonia Parr, for the same reason. It did not name Claire Mercer at all, because federal inspection personnel were not typically named in public enforcement announcements, and because Claire had not asked to be. She read the release on her phone in the parking lot of a highway rest stop 60 miles from Kettle Falls, sitting in her sedan with the engine running and a cup of coffee from the rest stop vending machine cooling in the cup holder. She was driving back. She had stayed through the previous evening to complete her formal inspection documentation and her witness statement, and Hargrove had told her at 9 o'clock the previous night that she was cleared to leave whenever she was ready, and she had stayed another 2 hours finishing the paperwork because the paperwork mattered. The release was accurate and appropriately measured. It described the investigation without overstating what had been proven and without understating the scope of what had been found. It was the kind of public statement that told the truth in the way that institutions told the truth, carefully, with full awareness that every word was a legal document as much as a communication. She put her phone away and drank the coffee and watched a semi-truck pull out of the rest stop and merge back onto the highway, and she thought about the morning before. The fog, the checkpoint, the torn paper on the cruiser hood, the cold, wet grass at the edge of runway 4. She thought about Tillman, the checkpoint officer, who had told the truth about the scanner reading when it would have been easier to match Rourke's account. She thought about Garrett, who had kept records of every denied maintenance request, even when it felt like keeping records nobody would ever look at. She thought about what it cost people to do those small things, to say accurately what they saw, to write down what happened, to not revise their account to fit the pressure of the moment. Those were not dramatic acts. Nobody was going to write a press release about them. But without them, the morning at Ironwood would have ended differently. She finished the coffee and pulled back onto the highway. 3 weeks later, the formal findings of the Federal Safety Review at Ironwood Municipal were released. The review had been conducted over 18 days by an independent team with no prior connection to the facility or to any of the contracting entities involved. What it found was extensive. Runway lighting systems at the field had been operating below certification standards for a cumulative period of approximately 22 months across the prior 4 years. The portable guidance array in Warehouse B had been in a non-operational state, with 2 units deliberately disabled for at least 4 months. The primary Runway 3 lighting network that had failed on the morning of the investigation had been flagged for replacement in 3 separate internal maintenance requests, all of which had been denied without documented justification. The review also found no evidence that any aircraft had been lost or any crew or passenger harmed as a direct result of the degraded systems. That finding was not reassuring to anyone who thought carefully about it, not because outcomes didn't matter, but because the absence of harm was not the same as the presence of safety, and the gap between those two things was exactly where the fraud had lived for 6 years. 2 of the similar contract structures at other facilities, the ones Hargrove had flagged for review on the morning of the investigation, were confirmed to have anomalies consistent with Vantage Civil Systems methodology. Both were placed under independent review. Federal maintenance contracts at both facilities were suspended pending full audit. Jeffrey Parr was indicted on 11 counts, including federal contract fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. His attorney entered a not guilty plea on his behalf. The indictment was 34 pages long and cited specific payment records, communication logs, and corporate registration documents, including the contents of Sonia Parr's laptop. Sonia Parr negotiated a cooperation agreement. The terms were not made public. The list document from her laptop became, according to a source Darren Ray mentioned to Claire in a phone call 2 weeks after the investigation, one of the most significant pieces of documentary evidence in the DOJ's ongoing review of the IG appointment process, because M. Kessler, the name in the notation beside Fowler's entry, was not a private actor. He was a senior official in a federal appointments advisory role, and his connection to the Parr network, if confirmed, meant that the corruption had reached a level above Fowler's appointment into the process that had put her there. That investigation was ongoing, and Claire was not part of it. She had given her statement and completed her documentation and answered every question put to her by every authorized person who asked. And then she had stepped back because stepping back when your part was done was also a form of professional discipline. Conrad Bellamy was indicted separately on 6 counts. He was 71 years old and in reasonable health and had access to good legal representation, and the case against him would take time. But the credentials log was clean, the ledger was specific, and the message exchange on Sonia Parr's laptop included 4 years of communications identifying him by his initials in a context that left no room for alternative interpretation. His attorney was working. The evidence was more patient than the attorney. Patricia Fowler was removed from her position pending the outcome of a formal misconduct review. The review was being conducted by an independent oversight body with no connection to the regional IG office. The process would take months. The ClearPath registration was in the record. The notation in Sonia Parr's ledger was in the record. What she had known, and when she had known, it was now a matter of documented investigation rather than allegation. Malcolm Dyer resigned formally 2 days after his removal, in a letter submitted through his attorney that contained no admission of wrongdoing and no explanation. He was charged separately, in state court, with fraudulent misrepresentation of safety certifications, a charge that had been coordinated with the federal case by the county district attorney's office, which had moved with unexpected speed once the federal documentation was available. His attorney filed a motion to dismiss that was denied in the second week. The case moved forward. Dana Rourke lost her position at the airport. Her law enforcement credentials were placed under formal review by the state licensing authority. The review would consider her cooperation as a mitigating factor. It would also consider 17 months of deliberate evidence and safety certification interference. She was not going to come through the other side of that review in the same professional standing she had entered it, and she knew it. The decision she had made to talk, to give up the names and dates and details, it hadn't been an act of conscience, or not primarily. It had been a calculation. But the outcome of the calculation happened to align with what the investigation needed, and the investigation had taken what it could use. Claire received the formal AMC commendation 6 weeks after the morning at Ironwood. It came through her inspection unit commander in a paper envelope, official letterhead, language that was precise and measured and said everything that the institutional framework allowed it to say, that her actions on the date in question had protected a critical military medical mission, that her pre-inspection analysis had identified systemic anomalies, that her conduct under adverse field conditions had been consistent with the highest standards of federal aeromedical inspection practice. She read it once, folded it back into the envelope, and put it in the filing drawer in her apartment that held the other formal documentation from her career. She didn't frame it, she didn't photograph it. She sent a brief acknowledgement reply as protocol required, and then she went back to work. Because there were 3 inspection requests pending on her desk, and an anomaly flag and a runway friction coefficient report from a field in a different state that she had been looking at for 2 days and couldn't quite resolve. The flag was small, the kind of thing you would miss if you weren't looking carefully. She was looking carefully. She had been sitting at her desk for an hour when her phone showed a message from Darren Ray. Short, characteristic of how he communicated. Ansel wants to talk to you. Formal consultation, the Kessler piece. You have time this week? She looked at the friction coefficient anomaly on her screen. She looked at Darren's message. Then she typed back, yes. Tell him Thursday. There was a moment, somewhere in the middle of that morning at Ironwood, when Claire had stood at the edge of runway 4 in the fog, with the portable guidance lights running their steady lines into the gray and the transport somewhere above the cloud layer, and she had not known for certain that it was going to work. The spare guidance units might not have been functional. The timeline might have been too tight. Garrett's crew might not have made it. The math had been very close, and close math was not the same as good math, and she had stood there knowing that and not having a better option than to proceed. That was the part that never made it into the commendation letters. The part where you don't know. Where you've done everything you can do and the outcome is still contingent on variables you can't control. And the only thing available to you is to keep going because stopping is worse. People in positions of authority, people like Rourke, like Dyer, often mistook composure for certainty. They saw someone who didn't argue, didn't escalate, didn't perform distress, and they read it as either weakness or arrogance, depending on the day. What they didn't read it as, almost ever, was someone who had simply decided that the loudest person in a room was not automatically the one with the most useful information. Claire had learned that early. Not in the military, not in the nursing program, but in a county hospital emergency room where she had been the youngest person on a shift and the attending physician had been wrong about a patient's presentation, and she had said so and been dismissed, and then said so again in a way that could not be dismissed, and been right. Not because she was smarter, because she had looked at the patient carefully and the numbers hadn't added up, and she'd been willing to say so out loud twice. Being right was not the same as being heard. She had spent enough of her career learning the distance between those two things to stop being surprised by it. What she had also learned was that the distance was not permanent, that it collapsed eventually when the situation became real enough that performance stopped being useful. Rourke could perform authority at the checkpoint in the fog. She could not perform a working guidance array into existence on a failed runway. Reality had its own way of resolving the argument. What she was less sure about, what she turned over quietly sometimes, in the hours between work and sleep, was what it cost the people who got ground up by the process before reality arrived. Garrett, filing denied maintenance requests and wondering if he was wrong. Tillman, filling out forms he didn't know how to fill out correctly, trying to match his account to a version of events that he had directly witnessed, but that his supervisor was rewriting. The people at the two other airports whose facilities had similar contract structures, who might have felt something wrong for a long time and had no particular reason to believe that flagging it would do anything other than create problems for themselves. She thought about those people more than she thought about Dyer or Bellamy or the commendation letter in her filing drawer. On a Thursday, in late autumn, 6 weeks after Ironwood, Claire Mercer sat across from Deputy Director Ansel in a meeting room in a federal office building in a city she had driven 4 hours to reach. Darren Ray was there. Vera Pellman, VP, as she would always be in Claire's contacts, was there, a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who shook Claire's hand without ceremony and said "good work" in the specific tone of someone who was not liberal with the phrase. The Kessler piece was complicated. It was going to require careful work and a long timeline, and probably a significant number of people looking at documents in ways that produced very little visible result for a very long time. And then, at some point, something would crack. The way things cracked when the weight finally exceeded the structure holding them. Ansel explained what they had and what they needed and where the gaps were, and he looked at Claire with the direct, evaluative attention of someone who needed to know whether she was a useful person to have in a room before he committed to having her in it. She answered his questions clearly and asked 3 of her own that he had apparently not expected, because he paused each time and then answered them with more detail than he had given anything else in the meeting. At the end of it, he said, "We'd like you formally attached to the consultation team, not full-time. We know you have active inspection work, but there are specific technical dimensions of the aeromedical logistics piece that your background covers in ways our investigators don't." "What's the timeline?" she said. "Long," he said, without apology. "Okay," she said. She drove back the same day, 4 hours, stopping once at the same rest stop where she had read the press release 6 weeks earlier. Different coffee, same vending machine. She sat in the parking lot for a few minutes and watched the highway traffic and thought about the work ahead. Not just Kessler, not just the 2 other airport reviews, but the specific, patient, unglamorous kind of work that made the dramatic moments possible. The anomaly flagged in a maintenance log. The inspection request filed against a supervisor's skepticism. The refusal to revise what you had seen to match what someone more powerful needed you to have seen. The work that nobody wrote press releases about. She had spent 9 years learning that the people who made the most noise about their own importance were often the least essential to how things actually held together. The checkpoints ran because someone showed up and read the scanner correctly. The runways were safe because someone filed the maintenance request, even knowing it would probably be denied. The evidence held because someone kept a parallel record in a drawer, against the day when it might matter. Those people were not invisible because they were unimportant. They were invisible because the system was designed to make them invisible, to route authority upward and credit upward, and let the people doing the actual load-bearing work stand in parking lots at 6 in the morning with torn paper on a cruiser hood. What Claire knew, from 9 years of standing in those parking lots, was that the paper was never the point. The paper was a symbol that someone else needed, a physical object to destroy so they could feel they had destroyed the authority behind it. But the authority wasn't in the paper. It had never been in the paper. It was in the work, in the preparation, in the friction coefficient anomaly. Sitting on her desk right now, in a report from a field she had not yet visited, in a number that didn't quite resolve when she looked at it carefully. She finished the coffee. She pulled back onto the highway. There was a runway somewhere that needed to be looked at by someone who would look at it correctly, and she was already thinking about what she was going to find when she got there. The paper they had torn in half had been sealed into an evidence bag and logged as Exhibit Number 1 in a federal fraud case that was going to take years to fully resolve. The woman they had tried to stop at the gate had walked out of the same gate when she was ready, under her own authority, at her own pace, in the direction of the next thing that needed doing. They had destroyed the document. They had not touched what was behind it. And that was the only thing, in the end, that had ever mattered.